Chapter 1174. Ah! More screams rang out as victims appeared one after another. Without exception, none of them were protected by the light of the jade pendant. No wonder the majestic heaven sect didn't care about stowaways at all. As it turned out, even if they had gotten rid of the ominous aura here, cultivators below the heavenly body tier still needed special protection to pass through this valley. Was the majestic heaven sect cruel enough to let these people die? Ling Han shook his head. This was not a question of whether the majestic heaven sect was cruel or not. Rather, it was a question of whether the majestic heaven sect cared. They were the #1 force in the galaxy, so did they need to care about what others thought? What a joke! Ling Han thought as he walked. He hadn't even walked halfway when all the stowaways were dead. He was only in the mountain river tier, so how long could he last? Ling Han's sympathy was not overflowing. Entering an ancient site to explore was to be responsible for one's own life and death. Without such awareness and courage, what was one doing in an ancient site? He was curious about what had killed these people. He knew about the black gas, but what was it? He communicated with the Black Tower and asked the notionless saint for guidance. That eternal river tier cultivator should have cultivated some evil cultivation technique that has affected the environment here. Notionless saint speculated. Since that third prime junior outside couldn't sweep away all ominous signs, I can conclude that his cultivation base is far inferior to the people who died here. Ling Han agreed. One was dead, and the other was alive. However, the living could not completely overthrow the arrangements of the dead. There was indeed a difference in strength. It was said that there was a huge gap between immortals, and this was proof of that. They were both at the eternal river tier, yet Venerable Trinity could only sweep away some of the inauspicious signs. Every 100 years, he would take advantage of the fact that the power of the restriction had reached its lowest point to open a gap for others to enter. Of course, Venerable Trinity couldn't be underestimated because of this. No matter what, he was the strongest expert in the entire galaxy. No matter what, the strong should be respected. Everyone walked very slowly because the progress of clearing away the ominous black chi was very slow. Even if Venerable Trinity personally took action, he would not be able to do so easily. After half a day, they finally arrived at the bottom of the valley. Venerable Trinity unleashed his great divine ability and tore space apart. Instantly, a pitch-black entrance appeared. Through this entrance, one could see a completely different world with verdant mountains and clear waters. What was even more shocking was that a river descended from the heavens, its end nowhere to be seen, just like the Milky Way. The river was dark and gloomy, exuding an endless aura of death. One could vaguely sense countless souls churning in it. Even separated by such an entrance, Ling Han could still feel the eeriness and horror of the Milky Way. Was this the Yellow Springs? We can go in now, Venerable Trinity said. There was a hint of exhaustion in his voice. He was a mighty eternal river tier elite, yet he was actually wearing an expression of exhaustion. It could be seen just how much of a burden it was for Venerable Trinity to clear out the ominous aura here and create a gap in the restrictions. Everyone hurriedly entered one after another. Shwa, 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 their figures flashed, their speed extremely fast. Bam! One person followed, but was suddenly blown to pieces. This person was at the Sun-Moon tier, and he had deliberately suppressed his cultivation level in an attempt to sneak in. He had already reached the final step, yet no one had managed to blast him out. Instead, he had been killed by the restrictions here. Those above the mountain river tier couldn't enter. This wasn't just nonsense. Ling Han also entered with Shui Yanyu and the others. When they passed through this entrance, they all felt an obvious chill. It was as if the dead were whispering in their ears, and the surging waves of the Yellow Springs surged into the sky, releasing a deafening roar. Everyone stepped onto their own paths, and they followed the Yellow Springs. This was something that everyone knew. If one walked along the Yellow Springs, they would never lose their way. Fourth brother, let's part ways here. The Rain Emperor and the others parted ways with Ling Han, and they all set off on their own. In the end, only Ling Han, Shui Yenyu, and Hu Feiyun remained. Let's go. Ling Han pulled Shui Yenyu along, and strode away. Wait for me. Hu Feiyun hurriedly followed after them, as if she were afraid that Ling Han and Shui Yenyu would leave her behind. The three of them walked side by side, and after walking for a while, Ling Han sniffed, and said, "Smells so good." You. Shui Yenyu hit him, thinking that he was flirting with her again. Really, there was still the ninth king present, and that was the Empress's clone. Ling Han laughed, and said, "You've been wronged. I didn't say that your body smells good, but there's a flowery fragrance." Really? Shui Yenyu's eyes widened. She didn't really believe Ling Han. This guy always found ways to flirt with her. I also smelled it. Hu Feiyun hurriedly nodded. Let's go. Ling Han turned around. In any case, the Yellow Springs was too obvious a target, and they could see it anywhere, so there was no need to worry about losing their way. They followed the fragrance, and after a while, a small hill appeared in front of them, and on the top of the hill, there was an incredibly bright flower blooming. It was this flower that was exuding a faint fragrance. It wasn't very strong, but it could travel extremely far. The three of them weren't the first to smell the fragrance. There were two others who had arrived before them, but they clearly weren't together, and were separated on two sides. Was this a godly medicine? Ling Han didn't recognize this flower, and Shui Yenyu and Hu Feiyun also wore blank expressions. They were probably the same. And what stopped them was that the surroundings of the small hill were filled with white bones, some humanoid, and some beast-shaped. Obviously, they weren't the only ones who had designs on this flower, but those who went to pluck it had all died. Ling Han didn't know the value of this flower, but with so many humans and beasts pouncing on it, he had reason to believe that this flower should be extremely valuable. Otherwise, why would everyone want to pluck it? Wait, wasn't this using a fixed pattern of thought? When the people who came later pounced on it, they naturally thought that the flower was a treasure, and went up in a rush. What a beautiful flower! Shui Yenyu's eyes were misty, and she revealed a dazed expression. She was about to stretch out her legs and walk towards the small hill. Ling Han hurriedly pulled her back, a shocked expression on his face. This flower's fragrance actually had the effect of confusing one's mind. However, this evidently varied from person to person. Neither he nor Hu Feiyun were affected, or rather, they hadn't been affected yet. Meanwhile, the other two had already walked forward. Their eyes were blank, but there was a fanatical expression on their faces. It was as if what they had arrived at was not a flower, but a supreme throne, and they could rule over the world and command all saints by sitting on it. Whoosh! When the two of them neared the small hill, a black cloud suddenly flew out from the small hill, and swept towards the two of them. It merely scraped against them for a moment, and the black cloud was blown away, shrinking back into the small hill. And these two people had actually turned into two skeletons. Pa! The skeletons fell to the ground, and became one of the many sacrifices around the small hill. So this was how people died. Chapter 1176. These insects not only had sharp teeth, but their saliva could also secrete a strange substance that caused intense pain to their prey, and even had a numbing effect. Ling Han discovered that his body had become somewhat stiff. Furthermore, this substance was spreading through his entire body along with his blood, and even his nerves were about to become numb. In this way, the power of his flames instantly weakened, and the dizzy, black snakes regained their momentum, pouncing toward Ling Han again. Ling Han channeled the indestructible heaven scroll, and the supreme mysteries of heaven and earth circulated in his body. Instantly, the numbness disappeared, and he laughed, the power of his flames rising again. Who's stronger? Ling Han drew out the divine demon sword. The divine demon sword also released endless flames, which was an excellent method to deal with insects. Wang! He was still channeling the 7-kill subduing soul technique, and a mental attack swept over. A large number of insects fell to the ground, and Ling Han stored them into the black tower. Perhaps they could become his secret weapon. With the circulation of the indestructible Heaven's Scroll, Ling Han's wounds were also rapidly recovering. Although there were the occasional bugs that could break through his defenses and bite him, a mere few bugs were not enough to pose a threat at all. After all, they were really too small, and if tens of thousands or hundreds of millions of them attacked together, their power would be terrifying, and they could instantly eat up a person's flesh. "Master, I admire you so much," the Azura Demon Emperor flattered from the side. Indeed, he had taken control of a Sun-Moon tier puppet, but faced with these insects, he suffered a crushing defeat, and one of his arms was almost bitten off. However, Ling Han had the upper hand. In comparison, the gap between them was obvious. This didn't mean that Ling Han was stronger than Sun-Moon tier elites. Rather, it was because his current techniques were more targeted. His physique was powerful, and added with the recovery ability of the indestructible Heaven's Scroll, he was the best candidate to deal with these insects. The sky was full of black clouds, but they had a clear area of activity, and definitely would not fly out. Even Ling Han's figure could not be seen, and only the flickering of flames could be vaguely seen, indicating that he was still fighting. However, as they fought, the black clouds began to grow fainter and fainter, because large amounts of bugs were killed and collected by Ling Han. One could see that a thick layer of bug corpses had formed under his feet. Finally, no more insects dared to attack Ling Han. The remaining insects flew back to the hill. Suddenly, the surroundings became quiet. Ling Han looked at the strange flower, and held his breath and all the pores on his body. Then, he used the indestructible Heaven's Scroll to guard his divine sense. In his mind, his true self sat on guard, emitting a golden light. Only then did he walk towards the strange flower. When he got closer, he began to dig the soil instead of plucking the flower. He dug out the strange flower along with its roots, and then stored it into the Black Tower. He planted this flower first, and then left the Black Tower. "Let's go." He did not shovel the small mound away, leaving the black insects a chance to live. The three of them and the puppet continued to move forward. They did not return to the Yellow Springs. In any case, they just needed to follow the direction. There was no need to follow the river. After tens of thousands of years, there was at least one thing that was certain, and that was that they absolutely could not go into the river, not even touching the river water. Why was it called the Yellow Springs? It was not as simple as just going up and being sinister. It was basically a river of death that could take away one's life. If one came into contact with the river water, they would die, and their soul would be swallowed by the river water. There had once been people who wanted to collect the water of the Yellow Springs. Unfortunately, they had just gotten close, and before they could collect it, only an empty shell remained of their body. This was a forbidden area, and could only be used as a signpost. As Ling Han walked, he communicated with the Black Tower, and asked Notionless Saint about the strange flower and the black insects. Could this be the misty soul-capturing flower? Notionless Saint thought for a moment, and then said, although it is completely useless to humans, its effects are extremely terrifying. In fact, it can even confuse the mind of Eternal River tier elites. Ling Han nodded, and said, right now, this misty soul-capturing flower can't even affect me, which means that it is far from mature. That should be the case, Notionless Saint said. If this misty soul-capturing flower was used well, it would be extremely effective. Because Ling Han had the Black Tower, he could summon the misty soul-capturing flower, and then hide in the Black Tower. However, this misty soul-capturing flower was far from mature. Even he could not affect it, so it would definitely be ineffective against Sun-Moon tier elites. At the very least, it would take a long time to see its effects. Then what about this insect? He asked. The Saint Beetle, Notionless Saint was slightly astonished. Ling Han was puzzled, and he asked, this kind of thing that eats human flesh can actually be called a saint? The orb of light that Notionless Saint had transformed into flickered, and it seemed like he was slightly moved. After a while, he said, that's because this insect was born from the corpse of a saint after his death. Huh? Ling Han was astonished. A saint could actually create such a strange insect after his death. Not every saint will be like this after their death. Depending on the great Tao they cultivate, some will turn into saint fire insects, while others will turn into saint ice insects. Moreover, not all insects are so small. I've seen a saint insect before, and it was tens of thousands of meters long. Its strength was also unfathomable, and even I didn't dare to oppose it, Notionless Saint said. Tens of thousands of meters long. Could it still be called an insect? Ling Han said, in that case, it's possible that this is the abode of a saint. Impossible. Notionless Saint immediately denied this, and said, if this was a trap set up by a saint, then how could a mere eternal river tier cultivator break through the restrictions? Unless they purposely let you in. It's probably a brat here who obtained some saint beetles from somewhere and slowly nurtured so many. Moreover, if it was the first batch of saint beetles that were born, they could easily bite even eternal river tier elites to death. How could they have been collected by you? Ling Han nodded. He had also obtained some saint beetles, so he could also slowly increase their numbers. However, these things really had to be treated with caution. If they were allowed to go out of control, the damage they could cause would be devastating. Saints were invincible when they were alive, and they could also cause chaos in death. However, everything had two sides. As long as they were used well, saint beetles could also play a positive role. After traveling for a day, they stopped and set up camp, preparing to rest. There was a change of day and night in this mystery realm, but it was only a change of light and darkness. It couldn't affect the sun, moon, or stars. It was clear that eternal river tier elites didn't have the ability to capture a sun and place it in the mystery realm. They had a total of half a year. After half a year, the restrictions would gradually become stronger, and even Venerable Trinity wouldn't be able to break through them. Thus, they had to return to the place where they had entered after half a year. At that time, Venerable Trinity would tear open the mystery realm again and take them away. They had to make sure of this timing. Otherwise, if they missed it, the restrictions would slowly become stronger, and kill the outsiders. They had never heard of anyone surviving to the next 100 years. Chapter 1177. Huh? Why did Big Sister Shui disappear in the middle of the night last night? Hu Feiyun asked curiously the next morning. Shui Yenyu was eating, and she instantly coughed when she heard this. She rolled her eyes at Ling Han. It was all this guy's fault. He called her out in the middle of the night to do some shameful things. Ling Han couldn't help but smile, and said, "You're just a child, so don't ask so many questions. Just eat your food." Hu Feiyun pouted. Why did everyone treat her like a child? Big Sister was like this, and now Ling Han was also like this. She was furious. After eating breakfast, they continued on their journey. There were not only creepy things like the misty soul capturing flower and saint beetles here, but also various godly medicines. Otherwise, the misty soul capturing flower wouldn't have attracted so many people. Because everyone thought that it was a godly medicine. They also discovered a few godly medicines along the way. Unfortunately, they were a step too late, and the godly medicine had already been plucked. Some people were crude, and not only plucked the medicine, but also destroyed its roots. However, some people were more careful, and were careful when plucking the medicine, leaving the roots intact. They could wait for another 100 years, or even the 100 years after that to pluck it. Ling Han didn't hold back. When he found the roots, he would directly dig them into the Black Tower. Only in the Black Tower could the effects of the godly medicine be maximized. The smile on his face became brighter and brighter. This was really a profitable trip. If he could have such harvests every day, then to say nothing of other things, merely this trip of plucking medicine would be a huge profit. However, his luck was sometimes good, and he could encounter 7 or 8 godly medicines in a day. Sometimes, it wasn't so good, and he would encounter countless godly medicines in a day. In the blink of an eye, 7 days had passed. Ding, ding, ding. The intense sound of weapons clashing came from ahead, and one could even see flashes of divine light soaring into the sky. It was clear that the battle was intense. Let's go. Hu Feiyun was immediately interested. Shui Yenyu's curiosity wasn't so strong, and she said, let's not be nosy. However, Hu Feiyun had already turned around and was running in that direction. She was extremely excited. They hadn't experienced any battles in these 7 days, so the ninth king's heart that yearned for excitement was completely out of control. Ling Han and Shui Yenyu exchanged a look, and could only follow after them. However, they weren't afraid. Sun Moon tier elites couldn't enter this place, so Ling Han was practically invincible. At the very least, they didn't have to worry about their safety. In front of them was a field of rubble. After passing through the rubble, both sides of the battle appeared in front of them. On one side, there were 7 people, and on the other side, there were 25 people. They formed an encirclement, trapping the 7 people inside. Hand over the 9-layer divine lotus, and we can spare your lives, one of the people surrounding them said. Bullshit. Among the 7 trapped, there was a beautiful woman with long red hair. She was dressed in an extremely bold and unrestrained manner. She wore a shoulder-bearing armor that revealed her 2 jade-like arms, and even part of her towering peaks could be seen. The armor on his lower body only covered his thighs, revealing 2 shockingly long thighs that were perfectly round and straight. However, her skin was not white. Instead, it was the color of wheat. Like a female leopard, she exuded astonishing vitality. She humphed, and said, you didn't kill us because you're afraid that we'll destroy the 9-layer divine lotus. If we hand over the 9-layer divine lotus, we'll die. Ha 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 ha. The people surrounding them all laughed loudly. Don't worry, Leader Meng. Everyone else will die, but you definitely won't. One of the people surrounding them laughed lewdly, and said, I've long heard of Leader Meng's beauty. If we don't have a taste of Leader Meng, wouldn't it be too much of a waste? He. Ha ha ha. The people surrounding them laughed without restraint. The mystery realm was so big, and the chances of others discovering their evil deeds were infinitely low. Even if they were discovered, they could just kill them all together. How despicable. Hu Feiyun couldn't help but draw her sword and rush out. Evil thieves, sword. She charged out alone, and the people surrounding them faltered for a moment before bursting into laughter. It was just a little girl, wasn't this like sending a lamb into a tiger's den? She's also a beauty. Perfect, there's only one Leader Meng. How long do we have to wait in line? Even if the 3 of us go together, we'll have to wait for 7 rounds. With another beauty, we'll only have to wait for 3 rounds. Huh? Boss, there's another beauty over there. These people's gazes landed on Shui Yenyu, and they immediately couldn't help but drool. This beauty was obviously even more beautiful, and she had a seductive charm that could make one's soul go crazy. If they could have sex with this beauty even once, they would be willing to shorten their lifespan by 100 years. Ayo. These people all howled like wolves, incredibly excited. You're all thinking too much. Ling Han's feet flew, and he had already arrived in front of these people. He said calmly, scram, and I can spare your lives. He wasn't a bloodthirsty person, and he didn't know what conflict there was between the 2 of them, so he didn't want to kill them all. Brat, you're very arrogant, aren't you? A brawny man in his 30s walked out. His clothes were unbuttoned, and a round belly was revealed. His face was full of muscles, and he held a large saber in his hand. His killing intent was very heavy. Handsome, thank you for your righteous rescue. However, these people are not to be trifled with. Hurry up and leave while you still have the chance. The red-haired beauty called out loudly. You've already gotten involved in this mess, and you still want to leave. One of the people surrounding them sneered. Ling Han cracked a smile, and said, they're just some trash, what's there to be smug about? You're courting death. The big-bellied saber-wielding man's eyes were cold. Taking advantage of the moment when Ling Han was speaking, he suddenly leaped and slashed at Ling Han. He used his full power right from the start. Divine patterns intertwined, and this saber was also covered in divine light, exuding a frightening coldness. Pooh! A cold light flashed, and the divine demon's sword had already appeared. It slashed out on its own, and easily sliced through the opponent's saber. Then, it followed the momentum and sliced the big-bellied saber-wielding man in two. Blood splattered, and internal organs danced wildly. Gasp! Everyone was inexplicably horrified, frightened by this sword. It was too terrifying. How could the might of this strike be so domineering? Wang, the divine demon's sword hovered beside Ling Han. Its blade was not stained with blood, yet it exuded a frightening murderous aura. As its level increased, the might exuded by this divine sword also became more and more frightening. One had to realize that devouring gold metal could mature into divine metal. Even if it hadn't reached this level yet, it was who knew how many times stronger than ordinary godly metal. "Sir, how should I address you?" one of the people surrounding them asked in a deep voice. He didn't dare to underestimate Ling Han anymore. Their group was all in the business of robbery, and they had spent money to buy a few spots to enter this place. They had also robbed a few people, and thus had a total of 25 spots. Even though they weren't prodigies, after countless years of cultivation, they had all reached the consummate level of the mountain river tier. In their eyes, wouldn't 25 people be invincible if they joined forces? However, Ling Han had killed one of their companions with a single strike, so they didn't dare to be careless anymore. They finally realized that there were still prodigies in this world, and their battle prowess was far beyond their imagination. Chapter 1178. PS Here is today's update, and I'm also pulling for votes for the Chidian 55 Fan Festival. Everyone has a ticket, and the votes will be rewarded with coins. Ling Han's eyes swept over them, and he said, "You don't have the right to know my name. Boss, don't waste words with him. Kill him." A thief shouted, appearing extremely arrogant. The thief leader hesitated slightly before retrieving a pill bottle. However, he didn't immediately open it. Instead, he said, "Sir, it's not too late for you to leave now. However, you have to leave these two women behind." He pointed at Shui Yanyu and Hu Feiyun. Seeing the killing intent flashing across Ling Han's face, he immediately said, "Sir, do you know what this purple pattern mountain river pill is? It can increase my battle prowess by 3 stars. I'm already at the peak stage of the consummate level of the mountain river tier. If I increase my battle prowess by 3 stars, do you think you'll still be a match for me?" He had spent a large sum of money to purchase this pill bottle, and there were only 2 of them. Thus, unless he had no other choice, he really didn't want to use it. This was a powerful weapon, and using it as a deterrent was far more effective than consuming it. Ling Han couldn't help but burst into laughter. He really couldn't help it. Shaking his head, he said, "Say, how narrow-minded are you? Do you think you can defeat everyone in the mountain river tier just because you've increased your battle prowess by 3 stars? You dare to underestimate me?" The thief leader said angrily. Ling Han moved. Wang, a terrifying aura descended, and the thief leader's face instantly paled. He couldn't even move a finger. How powerful was the pinnacle level of the mountain river tier? Naturally, they could crush those at the consummate level. Moreover, this thief leader was only an ordinary mountain river tier cultivator. He couldn't even be considered a 1-star genius. The gap between them was like the gap between heaven and earth. Ling Han grabbed lightly, and took the pill bottle. He smiled, and said, "It's too much of a waste for you to eat. Why don't you sell it? It should be enough to exchange for 1 tael of level 4 godly metal." The thieves were all dumbfounded. Their boss had actually been subdued before he could even make a move. Previously, they could still say that the big-bellied man had been careless, or perhaps it was because his opponent's sword was too powerful, which was why he had been sliced in 2. But now, all of them felt an instinctive fear, and their bodies were trembling. Mercy, mercy. The bandit leader immediately put down his dignity and begged Ling Han. He was very realistic. Ling Han revealed a dense killing intent and said, "Don't you want me to leave the woman behind?" "No, no, I wouldn't dare." The bandit leader hurriedly shook his head. "Ha, that's because I'm strong enough. If I wasn't as strong as you, my woman would be taken by you," said Ling Han indifferently. "Ling Han, I'm not your woman." Hu Feiyun raised her hand to clarify. Ling Han sighed and said, "Can't you see that I'm in the middle of showing off? You have to interrupt me at this time and ruin the atmosphere." "Oh." Hu Feiyun nodded weakly, and lowered her head to play with her fingers. "I'm not someone who likes to kill, but unfortunately, I can't find any reason to sympathize with you." Ling Han raised his right hand, and the divine demon's sword also started to move. The tip of the sword swayed back and forth on each of the bandit leaders' bodies. "Let's go." These bandits were also ruthless, and when they discovered that Ling Han had no intention of letting them go, their ferocious nature flared up. They no longer had any hope of getting lucky, and they wanted to fight to the death. For people like them, if there was a chance of survival, they definitely wouldn't mind pretending to be weak. However, if their chance of survival was cut off, they would become extremely vicious and evil people. They definitely wouldn't obediently accept death. They put down the red-haired beauty and the others, and charged toward Ling Han. If Ling Han didn't die, then all of them would die. Ling Han smirked coldly, and spread his fingers. Shio, shio, shio. 24 streaks of divine light shot out. Pu, 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 pu. The heads of the 24 bandits all exploded, and they died a clean and crisp death. The red-haired beauty and the others were all dumbstruck, and they looked at Ling Han in disbelief. What kind of freakish battle prowess was this? Didn't this place forbid Sun-Moon tier cultivators? However, wasn't this battle prowess at the Sun-Moon tier? A whole 24 cultivators at the consummate level of the Mountain River tier had been insta-killed just like that. Who could believe this? Ling Han smiled faintly, and said, "No need to thank me." After saying this, he pulled Shui Yanyu away. "Wait for me." Hu Feiyun faltered for a moment, and then hurriedly followed after them. "Hey, hey, hey." The red-haired beauty also came to her senses, and ran over. "Hey, handsome, why are you walking so fast? Are you worried that I'll eat you?" She even winked at Ling Han as she said this. Ling Han was astonished. This woman was too careless, wasn't she? She had almost been killed just then, and now she was actually in the mood to make eyes at him. "Are you all right?" Shui Yanyu asked. Sigh. The red-haired beauty sighed, and said, "We've really suffered heavy losses this time." She immediately began to talk, not caring whether Ling Han and the others were interested or not. As it turned out, they were a mercenary group that worked for money. However, they hadn't been hired this time. Instead, they had paid a large sum of money to come here on their own. Their goal was a treasure trove here. They had been hired to protect a person in the past 100 years, and during that time, they had discovered that treasure trove. In the end, they had suffered heavy casualties, and even their employer had died. However, they still couldn't forget about that treasure trove, and thus came here again. However, they discovered a 9-layer celestial lotus along the way. After paying the price of 4 deaths, they managed to pluck the lotus from the claws of the demonic beast that was guarding the divine herb. Who would have thought that the mantis stalks the cicada, unaware of the oriole behind, and they ended up being targeted by a group of thieves. If it weren't for the fact that they were afraid that they would destroy the 9-layer divine lotus, the red-haired beauty and the others definitely wouldn't have been able to last until Ling Han and the others arrived. "Handsome, you're so powerful, so why don't we cooperate?" The red-haired beauty extended an invitation. "That's right, my surname is Meng Wei." Ling Han grumbled in his mind. "Are we working together to obtain the treasure? It's like you're going to eat me up. How about half for each side?" Meng Wei was very enthusiastic. Although you're powerful, we're the ones who provided the location of the treasure. Hence, half for each side shouldn't be too much, right? Ling Han sighed and said, I haven't agreed yet. It's fine. I'll think about it and agree. Meng Weihao laughed heartily, not minding that her breasts were shaking, as if they were about to jump out of her armor. Ling Han's expression turned serious as he said, what kind of treasure is it? Tell me. Meng Wei revealed an as expected smile, and said, that should be the residence of an alchemist. Hence, there are many alchemical pills here, and perhaps even some pill recipes. Let's each make a copy, and we'll definitely make a huge profit if we sell them. Ling Han's eyes also lit up, attracted by the word alchemist. He nodded and said, all right, then let's cooperate. We'll split the elixir equally, and we'll each make a copy of the elixir recipe. Deal. Meng Wei stretched out her hand. Ling Han patted her hand, and the two of them reached an agreement. They set off and headed towards the residence of that medicinal pill. However, when it was night time, they still decided to stop and rest for a while to recover their energy. After all, they had experienced a huge battle during the day. It was going to be 55 soon. He hoped that he could continue to make it to the top 55 red envelope list. By the 5th of May, the red envelope reign would be able to give back to the readers and promote his work. A peace is also love, definitely good is better. Chapter 1180. P.S. Here's today's update, and at the same time, pull some votes for Qidian's 55th Fan Festival. Everyone has a ticket, and there are coins for voting. Hee hee. A smug expression spread across Meng Wei's face, and she said, I've cultivated a special cultivation technique that allows me to release a sliver of my divine sense within a certain range. Ordinary restrictions can't block it. Ling Han couldn't help but glance at her. This cultivation technique was quite good. It allowed him to explore unknown areas without risking his own life. What's the situation now? He asked. Meng Wei nodded. She closed her eyes, and it was as if she had become a stone statue. Huh? Ling Han's sharp senses detected that something had crawled out from Meng Wei's body. It was invisible and formless, so he naturally couldn't see or touch it. Only divine sense could sense its existence, but it had to be very close. If it was any further, he couldn't sense it. After a long while, Meng Wei suddenly opened her eyes, and said, as expected, it's still the same group of demonic beasts. I slashed the eye of one of them, and I still remember it clearly. What cultivation level are they at? Ling Han asked. Most of them are at the consummate level of the mountain river tier, and only a few are at the high extreme, Meng Wei said. Then, she patted Ling Han's shoulder, and said, in the past, we could only run, but now that you're here, go, and take care of all of them. Are you ordering me around like a lackey? Ling Han shook his head. If they were only at the consummate level of the mountain river tier, he naturally wouldn't be afraid. If there were sun-moon tier great beasts, then he could only run. However, it was still worth the risk for the treasure left behind by an alchemist. Pang! With a kick, he sent the courtyard door flying and directly barged in. This was a garden, but the garden was already abandoned. There were 3 demonic beasts lying on the ground resting. They looked like tigers, but the difference was that there was a single horn on their foreheads, and they were all silver in color. Hearing the commotion, the 3 demonic beasts all crawled up. Someone's here again. Ha, we can have a feast. Cultivators are very nourishing. If I eat a human, perhaps I can advance. How is that possible? Unless you can eat a human at the sun-moon tier. However, it's really not bad to have a sumptuous meal. It's been a long time since I've eaten human flesh. How nostalgic. The 3 demonic beasts spoke one after another. Once they reached the god realm, they would naturally be able to speak. It would not be a problem for them to transform into human form. Ling Han smiled faintly and said, it's been a long time since I've eaten beast meat. I don't mind trying it. What an arrogant human. Kill him. The three demonic beasts roared and charged towards Ling Han. These were three demonic beasts at the consummate level of the mountain river tier. Their battle prowess was quite astonishing, because demonic beasts had an innate advantage over cultivators. Thus, it was extremely normal for their battle prowess to surpass 1 star. Shio, 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 three demonic beasts pounced over, their shadows seeming to blot out the sky and cover the earth. Ling Han shook his head and casually raised a finger. Pa, pa, pa. 3 flashes of sword light swept over, and the 3 demonic beasts were sliced in half. They were completely dead. Because they had seen Ling Han insta-kill 24 thieves at the consummate level, Meng Wei and the others were already mentally prepared. However, seeing 3 powerful demonic beasts sliced in half with a single finger was still a huge shock to them. So it turned out that mountain river tier cultivators could be this powerful. As expected of a disciple of the majestic heaven sect, Ling Han walked over and casually stored the corpses of the 3 demonic beasts into the Black Tower. The bodies of high-level demonic beasts were treasures, and their spiritual flesh was extremely nourishing. It was extremely useful for body cultivators. More demonic beasts scuttled out from the manor. When they discovered that there were only a few pools of blood on the ground, and that their 3 companions were nowhere to be seen, they all flew into a rage. A horned tiger stepped forward, and said, "Human, where are our companions?" "They wanted to eat me, but I killed them," Ling Han said with a smile. This instantly infuriated the demonic beasts, and they all wanted to pounce over and bite Ling Han to death. However, the horned tiger released a roar, and suppressed the other demonic beasts. Then, it said, "Human, we have no enmity with you, so why did you come to our territory and kill our own kind?" Ling Han smiled, and said, "Your question makes me feel slightly embarrassed. However, since you are demonic beasts, why did you occupy the territory of humans? So, even if someone has to ask questions, I should be the one asking them. Why did you come here?" The horned tiger couldn't help but feel stifled. He had only asked this question to give Ling Han some psychological pressure. If some humans didn't have a strong enough mental fortitude, they would shrink back after being questioned by these few sentences. Moreover, he indeed didn't want to become enemies with these humans. 3 of his companions had actually been killed so quickly, so it was clear that their strength was a bit too strong. It would be best if they didn't battle. At their level, there wasn't much difference between demonic beasts and humans. They were all cultivators of the Tao of heaven and earth. "Big brother, why are you still wasting words with him? We have so many tigers, so why should we be afraid of a few humans?" a horned tiger said in disdain. They had also eaten many humans during the opening of ancient sites in the past. In their minds, human cultivators were synonymous with weakness, so there was naturally no need for them to be afraid. The leader of the horned tigers was clearly hesitant. On one hand, he didn't dare to underestimate Ling Han and the others, and on the other hand, he was used to thinking that humans couldn't be very strong. He didn't know what to choose at this moment. Die. However, Meng Wei drew her saber and charged forward. Leader. Her subordinates hurriedly charged after her. Otherwise, if she was surrounded by the tigers, she would be quickly torn to pieces even if she was at the consummate level of the mountain river tier. "Ha, it's you." A horned tiger chuckled coldly. There was a wound at the corner of his eye, and it had been inflicted by Meng Wei 100 years ago. He had been secretly hating her for so many years, and he hadn't thought that he would have a chance to take revenge. He was the first to pounce. Upon seeing this, the tigers also roared and charged forward. Upon seeing this, the leader of the horned tigers could only let out a roar and charge forward. "Kill! Kill!" Hu Feiyun hid behind Shui Yenyu. She liked bustling scenes, yet she was afraid of death. Thus, if there was danger, it was naturally up to them to deal with it. She would just watch from the sidelines. Ling Han shook his head. He had no intention of forcing her to fight either. For example, the Rain Emperor and the others needed to improve themselves through battle. However, Hu Feiyun's situation was special. She only needed to increase her cultivation level, and Empress Wan Xing's will would slowly awaken and guide her as she climbed to the peak of martial art. Thus, she didn't need to fight in battle. After all, she had already gone through this process. Meanwhile, Shui Yanyu was very interested, and she charged forward with her sword. She didn't want to be a pretty face by Ling Han's side. She wanted to show her light and warmth. Of course, she wasn't stupid. She found the weakest tiger in the pack, which was at the same cultivation level as her. Instantly, an intense battle broke out. The Azura Demon Emperor was responsible for protecting them. Although his battle prowess was only at the low extreme level of the Sun-Moon tier, in this mystery realm, his battle prowess was like that of a saint. Thus, Ling Han was very assured. However, he didn't dare to use this kind of power carelessly. It was possible that he would be targeted by the restrictions here. However, both Ling Han and the Azura Demon Emperor didn't move, so everyone immediately fell into a dangerous situation. It was almost 55, and they hoped that they could continue to make a name for themselves on the 55 red packet rankings. By the 5th of May, the reign of red packets would be able to reward readers and promote their works. Being a piece of cake was also love. It was definitely more refreshing to read on the phone. Chapter 1181. PS Here is today's update, and at the same time, gather votes for Qidian's 55th Fan Festival. Everyone has a ticket, and the votes will be rewarded with coins, begging for everyone's support and appreciation. The leader of the Horned Tigers was a little confused. He was originally very confident in the strength of these humans, and thus suppressed his ferocity, wanting to persuade Ling Han and the others to retreat rather than start a battle. However, in the current situation, these humans were completely here to die. Only 2 people didn't attack, but one of them was clearly at the Mountain River tier, and no matter how strong he was still at the consummate level of the Mountain River tier. 10 tigers should be able to deal with him, right? The other one was a stupid puppet, so there was even less of a need to worry about him. He was too careful. He also felt that way. In these tens of thousands of years, who knew how many humans they had killed and eaten? At most, they would encounter some small trouble. Humans were very weak. With this thought, he relaxed, and released a long tiger roar, saying, "Brothers, charge!" The remaining dozens of demonic tigers instantly roared and charged into the battle. With their participation, Meng Wei and the others were naturally in even more danger. "Handsome, hurry up and help!" Meng Wei called out. "Brat, you seem to be the leader of this group." The leader of the Horned Tigers stared at Ling Han, and said, "Just as well, I'm also the leader. Let's have a great battle, king against king." "Sure." Ling Han said with a smile. He clenched his right fist, and then punched out. Boom! Origin power burst forth, and regulations surged, transforming into a pillar of light. Peng, a wall instantly shattered, but the power didn't dissipate. Peng, 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 a total of 11 walls were destroyed. It wasn't that the power of this attack had disappeared, but that it had already blasted out of the manor, and there were no more walls to destroy. The beam of light quickly turned into a small dot. Wherever the beam of light passed, a deep pit was left on the ground, showing how terrifying the power of this attack was. The environment of the immortal realm was very stable, and it was very difficult for Mountain River tier cultivators to cause great damage. However, now that Ling Han had advanced to the pinnacle level of the Mountain River tier, his power had soared to 8 stars, and his destructive power had also become stronger. The face of the leader of the Horned Tigers twitched, and cold sweat dripped down his face. "I missed," Ling Han murmured. Then, he smiled. "What did you say just now? You want to challenge me, king to king? Duel my ass." The leader of the Horned Tigers was on the verge of tears. "You can't play with tigers like this." In the face of such a terrifying attack, not to mention him defending with all his strength, even if the Tiger brothers attacked together, they would probably all be killed in an instant. He finally understood that these humans were indeed very ordinary, except for this man. "Stop fighting, stop fighting," he shouted. "It's too late. I really want to eat tiger meat to nourish myself." Ling Han attacked, and with a flick of his finger, he dealt with the horned tiger. He had wanted to play for a while longer, but when he thought about the pill recipes and elixirs here, he decided to get down to business first. These tigers killed and ate people, so why should he be merciful? Sword chi sword, and wherever Ling Han passed by, all the horned tigers would be killed. Their corpses were all stored into the Black Tower. These were his spoils of war, so he naturally didn't need to share them with Meng Wei and the others. Meng Wei and the others all said, "How relaxing. It's so good to ride on someone powerful." They had thought that this would be a fierce battle, but they didn't think that it would be resolved so easily. With Meng Wei in the lead, they arrived at the depths of the manor. There was a secret room here, but it was protected by restrictions. 100 years ago, when we discovered this place, the restrictions were much more complete, Meng Wei said. 100 years ago, she had discovered this place using a secret technique, and discovered that there were many alchemical pills hidden here. Those demonic tigers probably occupied this place because they wanted to open it. Ling Han speculated. After reaching the immortal level, demonic beasts weren't much different from humans in terms of martial art. Thus, alchemical pills refined by humans were also effective on demonic beasts. However, this restriction is still quite powerful, he observed. Even after such a long time, this restriction was still extremely powerful. Otherwise, with so many demonic tigers teaming up, they would have been able to break it. "Handsome, can you break it?" Meng Wei asked. "I'll give it a try." Ling Han didn't take on everything. He first walked around this place, roughly understanding this restriction. Soon, he came to a conclusion. With his deduction ability, he would need around 10 years to break this restriction. Under normal circumstances, this was an impossible task. After half a year, this mystery realm would become incredibly dangerous, and all outsiders would be slaughtered. How could there be time for him? However, Ling Han had the reincarnation tree. He found an excuse, saying that he had to focus on studying this restriction, and that he couldn't be disturbed. He chased Meng Wei and the others out, and then told the Azura Demon Emperor to guard this secret room. Meanwhile, he entered the Black Tower, and comprehended under the reincarnation tree. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. 11 days later, Ling Han smiled confidently. He had used an extra day because entering and exiting the Black Tower and continuously observing this restriction would take up extra time. He called everyone over. "Handsome, you can break it just like that?" Meng Wei was extremely surprised. It had only been 11 days. Ling Han smiled faintly, and said, "I can't help it. I'm a prodigy." Everyone laughed, but Ling Han wasn't exaggerating. Breaking such a complicated restriction in 11 days was like a monster. Of course, the prerequisite was that he could succeed. Ling Han didn't waste his breath, and continued to move. At one moment, he would launch a few palm strikes here and there, and at the next moment, he would launch a palm strike there. It felt as if he was putting on a show, and Hu Feiyun couldn't help but yawn. Her patience had always been very poor. However, after an hour, everyone felt their bodies become lighter for some reason, but they didn't feel any obvious changes. The restriction has been broken. Ling Han smiled, and took the lead. Sure enough, he walked all the way to the door, and didn't suffer any attacks at all. He pushed the large stone in the secret room. This was a stone door, and under his push, the stone door groaned and slowly opened. Everyone's eyes widened, and they were filled with anticipation. The door opened, and they saw that it was pitch black inside. However, gods naturally didn't need light to see clearly. There were rows of pill cabinets in this secret room, and the cabinets were filled with pill bottles. We're rich. We're rich. Meng Wei and the others shouted excitedly. Ling Han walked in first, and the others followed behind him. So many high-ranked divine pills. This is a bone-polishing pill. It can increase the strength of bones. 1,000 crane pill. It can allow one to escape from the laws of heaven and earth and fly for a period of time. Frost pill. It can make one immune to ice secret techniques for a short period of time. Ah! Everyone looked at the labels on the pill bottles, and they were all overjoyed. However, when Meng Wei pulled out the cork of a pill bottle, she screamed in pain. Boss, what's wrong? Captain, you weren't satisfied with your desires a few days ago. Can't you take it anymore? These people teased her. The pill, it's already turned to dust. Meng Wei's face fell. It was going to be 55 soon, and she hoped that she could continue to make it to the 55 red envelope rankings. On the 5th of May, she would be able to give red envelopes to her readers and promote her works. A peace is also love, definitely good is better. Chapter 1182. P.S. Here is today's update, and at the same time, poll votes for Qitian 55 Fan Day. Everyone has a vote, and the vote will also give some coins, begging for everyone's support and appreciation. What? Everyone rushed up, and sure enough, there were no pills left in that pill bottle, only ashes at the bottom of the bottle. No way, where are the other pills? They all took down the bottles on the pill cabinet, and opened them one by one to check, but without exception, because too much time had passed, not a single bottle of pills could be preserved. This one bottle was a disappointment, and it broke their hearts. Every single bottle here was at least level 5, and one pill could be sold for a sky-high price. With so many pills added together, it was an indescribably huge fortune. But the dream of becoming rich didn't last long before they were slapped out of their dreams. All ruined. Wasn't this maddening? Ling Han didn't find it strange. Time was the greatest enemy of all existence, and so what if it was a divine pill? It would still decay. Of course, the higher the level of the pill, the less likely it was to deteriorate. If it was above level 10, then it might even become sentient, develop intelligence, and activate life. This was the so-called pill spirit, a precious treasure in the world, because once a divine pill activated life, not only would its own medicinal effects not be lost, but it could also absorb the essence of heaven and earth, making the medicinal effects stronger. However, to form a pill spirit, the first requirement was that the level of the pill surpassed level 10, and added with an incredibly long time, it might not succeed. Who would be willing to leave a divine pill aside after refining it? Judging from the alchemical pills he concocted, this alchemist should be below level 9. Thus, the alchemical pills he concocted are all between level 5 and level 8, Ling Han said to himself. However, to me, the pill recipes of this level are the best. Right now, I can barely refine level 5 pills, but I will soon advance to the Sun-Moon tier, so it won't be difficult to refine level 8 divine pills. Let's search, there should be pill recipes. After searching for a while, he indeed found a bookcase full of pill recipes. One pill recipe needed the thickness of a book to record, and too much time had passed, so these books had become incredibly fragile, and would turn into dust with a touch. Thus, Ling Han first stored this bookcase into the Black Tower. Then, it would be impossible for them to disappear even if they wanted to. He immediately made 2 copies, then took out the original copy and said, Leader Meng, according to our previous agreement, both sides can make a copy of all the pill formulas. I've already made a copy, and the original version is also here. You can pick one. When did you copy this? Meng Wei was still rummaging through the elixirs. She was unwilling to give up and wanted to see if there were any elixirs that had survived. Choose. Ling Han wouldn't say that he had taken the time to enter into the Black Tower and instantly finished making a copy. Moreover, it was 2 copies. Meng Wei carefully compared the two copies, and after discovering that there was not a single word that was out of place, she nodded and said, "It's so easy to cooperate with a handsome guy." Hey, hey, hey. Our cooperation is about to come to an end, so why don't we have a breakup party? I've been holding it in for so many days, and it's so itchy. Fuck off. Ling Han put away one copy and left the original version for her. In any case, it would shatter at the slightest touch. Could it be that my charm has decreased? Meng Wei wore a strange expression. Impossible. My breasts aren't small, my waist isn't thick, and my butt is still perky. Why can't I get this handsome guy? Could it be that he doesn't like women? Gasp. I can hear you, Ling Han said in annoyance. Leader. Leader. Someone suddenly exclaimed, his voice filled with excitement. What? What? The sky hasn't collapsed. Even if it did, isn't there still this handsome guy to support it? Meng Wei said. There's a bottle of unspoiled alchemical pills. Someone shouted. What? Meng Wei also jumped up and rushed over. Even Ling Han was a little curious, and he followed behind her. Most of the alchemical pills here had turned to dust, but there was one bottle that was unspoiled. Even those who didn't understand alchemy could guess that this bottle of alchemical pills had to be extraordinary, which was why they had survived for so long. Berserk Blood Spirit Pill. Meng Wei took the bottle and read the label on it. What alchemical pill is this? Everyone shook their heads. They had never heard of it before. Ha, this is a miraculous pill for Sun Moon tier cultivators. It can help Sun Moon tier cultivators advance by a sub-minor level, saving them tens of thousands of years of time, a voice suddenly said. Who? Everyone immediately turned around and walked toward the door. I am Ji Jinping. There was a person standing at the door. However, because it was extremely dark here, they could only see a pitch-black silhouette behind him. Even so, they could still tell that this person was very tall and slender. The person paused for a moment, and then said, hand over the divine pill, and I'll spare your lives. Or else? Meng Wei asked. Or else? Ji Jinping smiled. He opened his right hand, and an egg-sized object appeared in his palm. This is a viper poison explosion pill. Once it's thrown, it will immediately explode. Then, it will release a terrifying poison. Believe me, anyone below the Sun Moon tier, regardless of whether they're human or demonic beast, will be poisoned to death in half a breath's time if they inhale even a sliver of this poison. Meng Wei and the others were all astonished. He wasn't lying. The viper poison explosion pill was indeed that terrifying. However, whether the object in his hand was really the viper poison explosion pill or not was still a question mark. I'll give you 15 minutes to consider. If you don't hand over the divine pill after that, I'll have no choice but to throw this viper poison explosion pill in. Ji Jinping chuckled, and said, I hate killing people the most, so don't force me. No one knew whether he was speaking the truth or not. However, if he was speaking the truth, that would be far too terrifying. Meng Wei and the others didn't dare to act rashly. They were all people who lived on the edge of a knife, but it was precisely because of this that they cherished their lives. As long as they were alive, everything was possible. However, if they were dead, then there would be nothing left. Ling Han frowned. He, too, could not determine whether Ji Jinping was bluffing, or if he really had a powerful weapon in his hands. He was unafraid, but what if he dragged Meng Wei and the others into this? Since that was the case, he silently hid in the darkness, and then unleashed the annihilating dragon star arrow. He didn't even need to use the ultimate technique. With his current strength, he could insta-kill a consummate level being with a normal arrow. Ji Jinping smiled, and he was very pleased with himself. He had taken control of the situation by himself, and this made him feel very good about himself. However, a strong sense of danger suddenly welled up in his heart, causing his heart to contract violently, and all the pores on his body to close up. Danger! He couldn't care about anything else at this moment, and he hurriedly retreated. Shio! A streak of cold light flashed past at an astonishing speed, and it pierced through his left shoulder. The powerful force sent him flying. It was almost 55, and he hoped that he could continue to make a name for himself on the 55 red envelope rankings. By the 5th of May, he would be able to receive a rain of red envelopes to reward his readers and promote his works. A piece of cake was also love, and it was definitely better to enjoy it. Chapter 1184. Sai present today's update, and while I'm at it, Canvas votes for Chidian's 55th Fan Festival. Everyone has a ticket, and when you vote, you'll also receive some coins. I kneel and beg for everyone's support and appreciation. Sha Yuan's talent in martial art was indeed inferior to Zhao Luan's, but being able to be taken in as a key disciple, his strength was indeed considerably strong. Hung, the large hand descended, covering the sky and covering the sun. There was a cold smirk at the corners of his lips. What was this prodigy of the Scarlet Heaven Academy worth in front of him? No matter how freakish and genius you were, cultivation level determined everything. Die. He would take advantage of the instant when Ling Han's soul dissipated to extract the latter's memories and obtain as much as he could. Ling Han shook his head. This kind of attack would have no effect in front of him now. He took a deep breath, and then blew into the sky. Pa! That large hand of origin power immediately crumbled, turning into innumerable fragments that floated in all directions. Holy shit! Sha Yuan and the others all gaped in shock, completely unable to believe what they had just witnessed. This was too exaggerated, wasn't it? Blowing a breath was so powerful. This was not boasting. Could it be that this guy was in the Sun Moon tier? But, Sun Moon tier cultivators couldn't enter this place. Even if some forces nurtured some Sun Moon tier cultivators and had them destroy their own cultivation level, then consume forbidden alchemical pills to forcibly increase their power and return to the Sun Moon tier, Ling Han was so young, so could he possibly destroy his own cultivation level? No, impossible. Sha Yuan should be the one who understood Ling Han the most out of all of them. His face was filled with disbelief, and he pointed at Ling Han, and exclaimed, "How could you possibly possess such battle prowess? It's absolutely impossible. Sha Yuan, there are many things that are impossible in your eyes, but they will all come true. For example, I will kill you," Ling Han said darkly. If he had said this earlier, Sha Yuan would definitely not have believed him, but Ling Han had dispersed his large hand of origin power with a single breath, and the gap between their strength could be said to be obvious. Sha Yuan humphed, and said, "Fine, consider yourself lucky this time. You can leave." Ling Han was astonished, practically unable to believe his own ears. This guy still thought that he had the upper hand. He actually said that he could leave, as if he had done him a great favor. Ling Han understood. This guy was too full of himself. He still thought that this was Point Star City, and that he was the son of great General Sha, so he could do as he pleased just because he was in the heavenly body tier. What? You still haven't scrammed? Sha Yuan said coldly, clearly very impatient. He had already done him a great favor, so why wasn't this guy thanking him and scram? Ling Han shook his head and said, "Sha Yuan, I used to think that you were arrogant, overbearing, and a profligate disciple. But only now do I realize how wrong I was. Ha, you've finally discovered that this young master isn't ordinary, right?" Sha Yuan thought to himself as the corners of his mouth curled into a smile. "You're a fucking idiot," Ling Han said again. I wiped Sha Yuan's smiling face immediately became incomparably awkward. He hadn't expected that there would be a sudden turn of events and that Ling Han would actually stab him in the back. He said coldly, "What exactly do you want?" "Nothing much. I just want to borrow your head," Ling Han said calmly. "You're courting death." Sha Yuan was furious. Who was the son of an elite of the heavenly body tier? Someone actually wanted to borrow his head? Furthermore, this person was a country bumpkin from a small world. Ling Han shook his head, and said, I still can't talk too much nonsense with you. Otherwise, my intelligence will be dragged down by you. Alright, I've let you say so much before you die. It's time for you to be on your way. You dare to kill me. Sha Yuan was filled with shock. He felt that this was a colossal joke that was practically unacceptable. Who was he? How high was his status? Ling Han actually wanted to kill him. Ling Han didn't answer. Instead, he stretched out his right hand, and a powerful force began to gather. His killing intent was also boiling. Now it was Sha Yuan, and in the future, it would be Zhao Luan. All the debts that were owed to him, he would collect them one by one. He flicked his finger, and shio, a flash of sword light streaked past, slashing towards Sha Yuan. Pooh! Blood splattered, but Sha Yuan wasn't sliced into two. There was a flash of golden light on his body, and it was as if he had become a golden-armored god of war. Ling Han's eyes widened, and he saw that Sha Yuan's body was actually wrapped in a golden law decree. It was precisely that law decree that had activated its might in a timely manner, blocking Ling Han's sure-kill attack. Evidently, this was the law decree that great General Sha had bestowed upon his son. You, how dare you! Sha Yuan was unable to restrain his anger, and even his voice was trembling. If this law decree had activated its might, it could only mean one thing: he had encountered a situation where he would definitely die, and that was why the law decree had activated on its own. He had almost died. You deserve to die. Sha Yuan roared loudly. This law decree could only be activated passively, but now that it had been activated, how could he possibly miss such an opportunity? He was just about to use this opportunity to kill Ling Han. He attacked, and as his fist blasted out, the law decree increased his battle prowess. It transformed into a golden bull that charged towards Ling Han. AI, why were these rich second generations so difficult to kill? Ah! Just as Ling Han was grumbling internally, Sha Yuan gave a muffled grunt, and an expression of pain appeared on his face. The golden light on his body also trembled, and the law decree flickered between brightness and darkness as if it was about to be destroyed. That bull also dissipated on its own. Ling Han was startled at first. He hadn't even attacked, so why did Sha Yuan look like he was in agony as if his ass had been pierced? However, he immediately understood. There were restrictions here, and as long as one's power reached the Sun-Moon tier, they would be targeted. Previously, the law decree had activated its might, and blocked one of his finger swords. Though its might was extraordinary, it had not reached the level of the Sun-Moon tier. But now, Sha Yuan had taken the initiative to attack, and activated the law decree. His power had reached the level of the Sun-Moon tier, so it was natural that he would be targeted by the restrictions here. He had not injured the enemy, but had injured himself first. Yet Sha Yuan himself did not understand. He still thought that Ling Han had also used some kind of secret technique to target him. Not only had he not suppressed the law decree's might, he had instead drawn out the law decree's power a step further. Once the law decree was activated, its power would slowly dissipate. Even if he did not use it, he could not possibly recover it. Thus, he naturally wanted to take advantage of this rare opportunity to kill Ling Han. Ah! But with such a draw of power, he screamed even louder. The law decree continued to tremble as if it was about to be torn apart. Pa! This law decree actually exploded into pieces, turning into fragments that filled the sky. Sha Yuan also suffered a backlash, and spat out a mouthful of blood. Thankfully, he had not been sliced apart as well. His face was filled with confusion. What was going on? Even when the law decree was activated, this was the result. He pointed at Ling Han, and said in a trembling voice, what demonic technique did you use? How ignorant! Ling Han shook his head. With a flick of his finger, sword light streaked past, slicing towards Sha Yuan. Stop! Xi Jinping and the others all pounced out, helping Sha Yuan neutralize this attack. But though Ling Han had done it casually, his present power had reached 8 stars above the peak stage of the mountain river tier. How powerful was this? Peng, 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 peng. All 4 of them were sent flying by this finger sword, but Sha Yuan luckily escaped death because of this. If you want to help him, I'll kill all of you, Ling Han said indifferently. Who else wants to stop me? It was going to be 55 soon. He hoped that he could continue to make it to the top 55 red envelope list. By the 5th of May, the red envelope reign would be able to give back to the readers and promote his work. A peace is also love, definitely good is better. Chapter 1185. You're that mysterious person. The 4 people from the Majestic Heaven sect all pointed at Ling Han. Only now did they realize that this person couldn't possibly be the country bumpkin that Sha Yuan spoke of, but was the mysterious elite that had wounded Ji Jinping with an arrow. How was this possible? When did such a powerful king tier appear among the younger generation? Just that strike alone was definitely on par with He Tao, Wu Zhe, and the other king tiers. Ling Han's gaze swept over, and he said, "Leave behind your spatial spirit tool and scram." These people wanted to rob him, so there was naturally no reason for him to let them off. That would be letting them off too easily. Don't go too far. Ji Jinping shouted angrily. However, blood was still spurting from his shoulder, greatly affecting his image, and he had no might to speak of. Ling Han smiled faintly, and said, "The path you guys walked before was too smooth, and you actually said such childish words. Humph, in front of me, who do you think you are? If you don't obediently leave behind your spatial spirit tools, then I'll kill you." Ji Jinping felt extremely humiliated, but couldn't help but remember that he had also used the Viper poison explosion pill to threaten them before, saying that he would kill them if they didn't hand over the Berserk blood spirit pill. Now, it was just an eye for an eye. Fairness. In this world, whoever was stronger would be the representative of fairness. You win. Ji Jinping and the others all took out their spatial rings and threw them on the ground, appearing extremely angry. They could all be called prodigies, and it had always been them who did whatever they wanted. When had they ever suffered such humiliation? Sha Yuan also threw out a spatial ring, and was about to leave with Ji Jinping and the others. Ling Han couldn't help but laugh, and said, "Young Master Sha, has your head been kicked by a donkey? Did I say you could leave? Ling Han, if you really want to kill me, aren't you afraid that my father will fly into a rage and come here to take your dog life?" Sha Yuan said harshly. The decree was destroyed, and he finally felt true fear. When he said these words, he appeared fierce but was actually cowardly. Ling Han shook his head, and said, "I'm sure Great General Sha wouldn't mind having one less son like you who deceives his father." "Sir, you've already taken the money. There's no need to be so overbearing," advised the blue-robed youth. The 5 of them were together, and they naturally didn't want their companions to be slaughtered. "I'll kill your entire family, and then I'll tell you that since he's already dead, there's no need to be so overbearing. Are you happy or not?" Ling Han glared at him, then said impatiently, "In 3 breaths, all of you scram. Otherwise, you can accompany him in death." He was truly enraged. His terrifying aura transformed into a vast ocean, incomparably frightening. Ji Jinping and the others were all astonished. This was definitely a king tier. How can a king allow others to challenge his authority? Their faces were all pale, and they all turned around to leave. They did not dare to say another word, lest they were killed by Ling Han as well. Since Ling Han had already decided to kill a key disciple of the Majestic Heaven sect, and the son of a heavenly body tier elite at that, killing a few more key disciples and descendants of the heavenly body tier would not be a big deal. "Don't go. Save me. Save me." Sha Yuan was dumbfounded. This was the first time he had felt death so close to him, and he felt a chill run down his spine. Ji Jinping and the others ignored him, and fled very quickly. Sha Yuan blankly turned around, and looked at Ling Han for a while. Then, he suddenly said, "Don't kill me. I can be your friend. I'm the son of an elite of the heavenly body tier, so you definitely won't lose out if you have me as a friend." Ling Han broke into a smile, and said, "I really did not want to say this to scare you. However, you are so full of yourself, so if I don't deal a blow to your ego, I would really feel bad. Speaking of friends, I have a saint as a friend. Furthermore, the Empress will also be my wife in future. This friendship of yours, sigh. I really can't accept it." Sha Yuan was dumbfounded. "You must you be lying to me. A saint? How could it be that only Genesis tiers could be called saints? If you could befriend a saint, then wouldn't you be able to do as you please in this world? And you even said you wanted to marry the Empress. Hey, how high and mighty was the Empress? Even his old man could only drool in secret, so how could Ling Han have a chance? I am about to die, so there is no need for me to lie to you. However, there is also no need for me to make you believe me." Ling Han smiled, and said, "Are you ready to die?" Sha Yuan felt a chill run through his body, and his legs involuntarily turned to jelly. He knelt down with a paw, and cried, "Don't kill me. I don't want to die. I don't want to die." "That's right, no one wants to die." Ling Han raised a hand, and said, "But because of your own desires, you coveted the fateful opportunities that I possessed, and sent people to hunt me down. If it were not for the fact that I have a few tricks up my sleeve, I'm afraid that grass would have already grown over my grave." He shot out a punch, and a terrifying power descended. Pa, Sha Yuan was instantly blasted apart. His body and spirit were both destroyed, and he turned into a mist of blood that filled the air. Not even a complete corpse was left behind. "Hey, handsome guy, you killed a disciple of the majestic heaven sect, so will you kill us as well?" Meng Wei swallowed with difficulty. The others hurriedly cast looks at their captain, meaning to say, "Why are you asking? Why don't you pretend to be confused and sneak away? Aren't you reminding us by asking now?" Ling Han laughed loudly, and said, "It's fine. In any case, we have already let 4 of them escape, so it doesn't matter if we have a few more alive. You guys won't go and tell on me, right?" Meng Wei and the others hurriedly shook their heads. "That's good." Ling Han picked up the spatial rings that Ji Jinping and the others had left behind, and took out the items inside. Then, he stored them in the Black Tower. If he kept them in the spatial ring, they would be able to link him to the murderer if they were found in the future. However, if he stored them in the Black Tower, who would be able to find them? "Handsome guy, this bottle of Berserk Blood Spirit pills belongs to you." Meng Wei handed over the bottle of alchemical pills that she had obtained previously. Ling Han smiled, and said, "Didn't we agree to split it evenly? You saved us again, and we have obtained so many pill recipes. We have already profited greatly. As humans, we cannot be too greedy." Meng Wei shook her head. "All right." Ling Han accepted the alchemical pill. In the process of obtaining the treasures here, he was the one who had contributed the most. Taking one more bottle was considered one bottle, but in truth, it was not an exaggeration to say that there was only one alchemical pill inside. "In that case, we'll be taking our leave now, handsome." Meng Wei cupped her hands in greeting. After Ling Han nodded, she added, "I really don't want to have a breakup party. Get lost." After watching Meng Wei and the others leave, Ling Han and the others also set off. However, Ling Han's attention was focused on the pill recipe he had just obtained. He was definitely unable to concoct alchemical pills above level 5, as the level of his divine sense was a little too low. However, if it was level 5, he should just barely be able to concoct it. After all, his divine sense had been continuously tempered by the indestructible heaven scroll, and was far stronger than an ordinary mountain river tier cultivator's. Moreover, he had also stepped into the pinnacle level. He searched for a while and discovered that the Berserk Blood Spirit pill was among these pill recipes. Chapter 1186. P.S. Here's today's update, and by the way, poll votes for Chitian 55th Fan Day. Everyone has a vote, and the vote will also send some coins, begging for everyone's support and appreciation. The Berserk Blood Spirit Pill could raise one's cultivation level by a sub-minor level at the Sun-Moon tier. Moreover, there was no cultivation level restriction. In other words, a cultivator at the middle stage of the low extreme of the Sun-Moon tier would be able to reach the late stage of the low extreme by consuming one, and a cultivator at the early stage of the consummate level could similarly reach the middle stage of the consummate level by consuming one. This effect was too shocking. However, when Ling Han looked at the ingredients listed in the prescription, he grimaced. The ingredients required to concoct such a heaven-defying pill were naturally extremely astonishing. Among them, the most important of the main ingredients was called the Red Rain Divine King Fruit. Though it was only a level 8 godly medicine, it was incredibly rare. Furthermore, the age requirement for it to be able to be used as medicine was as high as 1 million years. Even if it was placed in the Black Tower and nurtured from scratch, it would still take as long as 1,000 years. To immortals, 1,000 years was indeed not a long time. Mountain River tier cultivators might not even be able to take a single step forward, but Ling Han's advancement was too fast, so 1,000 years was a little hard for him to accept. However, if he encountered the Red Rain Divine King Fruit, he still had to get it. Even if it wasn't for himself, he could also prepare it for his brothers, his friends, his beautiful wives, his parents, and his children. In short, the more of such precious medicine, the better, and he would never turn his back on it. Of course, the effects were obvious even when consumed by cultivators at the consummate level of the Sun-Moon tier. The Berserk Blood Spirit Pill was naturally a level 8 divine pill, and there was a certain degree of danger if consumed by cultivators at the low extreme, medium extreme, or high extreme of the Sun-Moon tier. There was a possibility that their bodies would explode. Thus, if these people were to consume the Berserk Blood Spirit Pill, they would need the protection of their elders, who would be able to suppress the pill's effects with great strength. Otherwise, if they were to die from consuming the pill, it would be too unjust. Ling Han set the Berserk Blood Spirit Pill aside. Firstly, his divine soul was not strong enough. Secondly, he did not have the ingredients to refine it. The first pill he prepared was the Thousand Crane Pill. This could allow cultivators below the heavenly body tier to also be able to fly, but only during the duration of the effects of the alchemical pill. Moreover, their speed could be increased explosively, so it was very practical. At a critical moment, it could be used to save lives. Life-saving pills were definitely the most valuable. The three of them hurried along during the day and stopped to rest at night. Traveling in such a dangerous place, it was only natural that they would try their best to maintain their peak condition. At night, Ling Han would come to the reincarnation tree to comprehend the pill recipe. He was the alchemy emperor, so he was naturally a maniac in this aspect. Once he started researching, he wouldn't be able to stop. For a good few days, he sat alone under the reincarnation tree, and Shui Yanyu was not used to this. Usually, Ling Han would always tease her, causing her to blush and feel incredibly embarrassed. But now, he actually treated her as air for several days in a row. He didn't even give her a flirtatious look. She was infuriated. She either behaved like a hooligan, or she behaved like a proper gentleman. She was really extreme. After traveling for a few more days, a mountain appeared in front of them. This mountain could only be counted as half a mountain. Because it was almost cut off at the waist, the remaining half of the mountain seemed a little abrupt. There were silhouettes flashing on the mountain, and it wasn't just one or two, but many. Ling Han and the other two walked to the foot of the mountain, and only then did they know that this was a medicinal mountain, and there were many divine medicines here. Low-level divine medicines could be plucked at will, but high-level divine medicines were protected by restrictions, and it was very difficult to remove them. Some were completely impossible to remove, and would require at least the action of a heavenly body tier elite. Ling Han couldn't help but be delighted. Perhaps there was a ripe red rain divine king fruit here. Then he only had to advance into the sun-moon tier, and he would be able to concoct the berserk blood spirit pill, and his strength would soar. Moreover, even if it wasn't for the red rain divine king fruit, as long as it was a divine medicine, wasn't it worth plucking? The three of them had clearly come too late. The low-level divine medicines that weren't protected by restrictions had all been plucked away. However, Ling Han wasn't very interested in these divine medicines either. The Black Tower had already nurtured a large number of divine medicines, though their grade was relatively low. They walked, searching, and very soon discovered a few divine medicines that were protected by restrictions. They were as high as level 7, but they hadn't matured yet. According to Ling Han's speculation, there should be a mother medicine that had matured long ago, but because it hadn't been plucked away, the seed had fallen where it was, and thus a few stalks had grown. That was because this area was designed for a single divine medicine to grow in the first place, and now there were a few stalks growing. Though it didn't seem crowded, there was clearly not enough nutrients, causing these divine medicines to appear very dispirited. "I've made you suffer, but I'll save you," Ling Han couldn't help but say with a smile. "I've never seen you so shameless. You obviously want to use me to concoct alchemical pills, and you still act like you're a savior." Hu Feiyun made a face at him. "Then don't eat the alchemical pills I concoct," Ling Han said with a smile. "I was just saying, don't be so petty," Hu Feiyun said with a pout. Ling Han circled around the divine medicines a few times, and first memorized the restrictions. Then, he started to make predictions under the reincarnation tree. After a while, he entered the Black Tower, and began to dispel the restrictions. This took much more time than he had imagined. After 17 days, Ling Han finally dispelled the restrictions, and stored these level 7 divine medicines into the Black Tower. "At this rate, even if I spend all of half a year here, I won't be able to take away many divine medicines." Ling Han shook his head. "Let's search first and see if there are any red rain divine king fruits. This is the most valuable divine medicine to me at this stage." Shui Yanyu and Hu Feiyun naturally wouldn't have any objections. Moreover, they could also enjoy the divine pills he concocted, so there was even less reason for them to object. Ling Han gave up on the idea of capturing them all in one go, and began to search for the red rain divine king fruits. If he could find them, he would do his best to harvest them, and if he couldn't, he would come back to search for the most valuable divine medicines here. No matter what, he had to take a few back. However, even he had to spend over a dozen days to dispel a restriction, which was equivalent to over a dozen years' time. Others naturally could only look on and sigh at their inadequacy. Thus, unless they brought along a special treasure that could dispel the restrictions, most people could only harvest the ordinary divine medicines that weren't protected by the restrictions. Because he only searched and didn't take, only half a day later, Ling Han had more or less searched through this herb mountain. When he was about to finish, his eyes finally lit up, and he showed an expression of pleasant surprise. "There really are red rain divine king fruits." Ling Han laughed loudly. In front of him, there was a tree that was 30 meters tall. It was completely crimson, and its leaves were formed from flames, burning fiercely. And between the leaves, there were multiple fruits. These fruits gave off steam, and like raindrops, the steam fell on the fruits. It was very mystical. Ling Han was naturally happy. Though these fruits weren't completely ripe, they were already very big. If they were planted in the Black Tower, perhaps they would be completely ripe in another 3 to 5 years' time. This was really a great gift. There were a whole 27 fruits, and according to the calculation of refining one berserk blood spirit pill for each fruit, that would be 27 pills. The prerequisite was that he succeeded every time, and didn't waste a single one. This was naturally impossible. Who could refine alchemical pills in one go? Ling Han rubbed his hands and began to study how to break the restriction. It was going to be 55 soon. He hoped that he could continue to make it to the top 55 red envelope list. By the 5th of May, the red envelope reign would be able to give back to the readers and promote his work. A peace is also love, definitely good is better. Chapter 1188. A beautiful romance. Even if her opponent was a ginseng, Shinju clearly wouldn't allow the old ginseng to attack her chest. She hurriedly activated an origin power shield. Pooh! The old ginseng unleashed a beam of regulation light, which forcefully slashed apart the origin power shield. Pieces of cloth flew through the air, and Shinju's bra was instantly torn apart. However, what disappointed the old ginseng was that there wasn't a towering jade mountain under this white dress. Instead, there was a golden undergarment that tightly wrapped around her chest. Could this be the legendary golden breast? The old ginseng couldn't take his eyes off her, and even saliva was dripping out of his mouth. However, he was a spiritual medicine, and his saliva was also extremely fragrant. It could be considered a great tonic. Brat, you actually dare. The old ginseng charged towards Ling Han, his anger soaring. Be bastard. Shinju was so angry that her body trembled. She was one of the 6 great king tiers, yet she was being teased by a ginseng. How could she not be furious? Fortunately, she was wearing a treasured garment. Otherwise, she would really have to expose herself to the old ginseng. She was furious, and she waved her slender hand. Terrifying divine chains intertwined and shot towards the old ginseng. She had no intention of capturing him alive. In any case, ginseng could be eaten even if it was smashed. It would only slightly affect its medicinal effects. Golden breast, why are you so fixated on your grandpa? The old ginseng dodged as he teased, this brat is also a part of the people who killed your golden breast. Why don't you beat him up as well? He was still complaining about being wronged. Die! Shinju screamed. She was a king tier of the younger generation, and she should be calm and composed. She wouldn't be shocked even if the sky collapsed before her eyes. However, this old ginseng was far too provocative. She was enraged in just a few moves, and she wouldn't stop until she tore him into pieces. There's nothing I can do. Grandpa Ginseng is too handsome. This golden breast loves me so much that she wants to kill me so that she can be with me forever. The old ginseng sighed, looking extremely narcissistic. Grandpa Ginseng is really a sinner. Ling Han had an urge to vomit. As he teamed up with Shinju, he said, lowly ginseng, I've never seen anything more shameless than you. Of course. Grandpa Ginseng is unique. The old ginseng was smug. However, he immediately flew into a rage. You dare to insult your grandpa? This old ginseng was too despicable, taking advantage of people the moment he opened his mouth. Inescapable net. Shinju shouted. Her regulations and origin power intertwined, forming a massive net. Ling Han also summoned his crimson ground-locking net and used it to trap the old ginseng. His front, back, left, and right were all sealed off, yet this old ginseng burrowed into the ground. Xiao, he instantly disappeared. He was originally a ginseng that grew in the soil. After attaining Dao, not only did his ability in this aspect not disappear, but it was also strengthened. His earth escape technique was shockingly strong. It was gone. Swoosh! She was just about to say that it had disappeared when the old ginseng suddenly charged out from the ground. This old ginseng was truly despicable. It had actually charged out from between Shinju's legs, and was heading straight for her lower abdomen. Die! Shinju was infuriated, and her black hair danced wildly in the wind. Divine light also intertwined around her body, transforming her into a layer of frost. Ah, your grandpa is going to freeze to death. The old ginseng was frozen solid, and he fell to the ground. However, before Ling Han and Shinju could capture him, he once again burrowed into the ground. Ling Han was astonished. Even though Shinju had been tricked badly by the old ginseng, this woman was truly powerful. The might of her frost was extremely frightening. Ling Han estimated that if he was struck by her at close range, he would most likely be frozen solid as well. Even if his body wasn't damaged, Shinju's could use divine chains to bind him, or kill the people around him. A king tier was not to be underestimated. Golden milk, remember not to wear long pants under your skirt next time. You made Grandpa Ginseng lose everything. The old ginseng appeared in the distance. However, he didn't dare to get any closer. It was clear that he had suffered. Shinju didn't say anything. She merely stared at the old ginseng. She waved her hand, and a layer of frost immediately spread toward the old ginseng. Grandpa Ginseng won't play with you anymore. The old ginseng hurriedly burrowed into the ground and fled. He was only extremely fast. However, in terms of battle prowess, he was far inferior to Shinju and Ling Han. If he dared to face them head-on, he would be courting death. For example, Ling Han hadn't used his flame divine patterns earlier because he didn't want to injure this treasured ginseng. Shinju was furious. Not only had she failed to obtain a godly medicine, but she had also been tricked badly. This was unprecedented. This despicable ginseng isn't simple. Not only is it of an extremely high level, but it has also existed for countless years before gaining intelligence. It can even use the regulations of heaven and earth. It has truly attained Tao, Ling Han said. Shinju's pretty face was filled with rage. Who cares if it's attained Tao or not? I'm definitely going to kill it. She had almost exposed her chest, so she didn't want to stay here any longer. She nodded at Ling Han and turned to leave. How fun. Hu Feiyun's eyes lit up. If you were tricked by that despicable ginseng, you probably wouldn't be able to laugh anymore. Ling Han shook his head. This old ginseng was far too fast. Most likely, only Sun Moon tier elites would be able to defeat it. Let's go. Ling Han decisively set aside his greed for this godly medicine. Since he couldn't defeat it, what was the point of wasting time? They descended the herb mountain. Meanwhile, Ling Han was thinking about how great it would be if he could completely open this mystery realm. That would give him enough time to store all the godly medicines here into the Black Tower. However, if someone had the ability to open this mystery realm, what could he do? The mystery realm wasn't peaceful. There were many demonic beasts here, and they killed each other. They also ate humans, and they continuously attacked them. However, they were all killed by Ling Han and stored into the Black Tower as food. He had accumulated a large amount of spiritual meat, and after eating it with Shui Yenyu and Hu Feiyun every day, they could clearly feel their stamina improving. A few days later, another mountain appeared in front of them. However, Ling Han definitely didn't believe that this was a naturally formed mountain. This was because this mountain was completely like a soaring eagle, and every detail of it could be seen clearly. Could it be that this was formed from a dead demonic beast? Immortal-level demonic beasts could easily reach tens of thousands of meters in height. Thus, although this Eagle Mountain was ridiculously tall, it wasn't impossible that it had been formed from a demonic beast. Moreover, this was the place where the most intense competition in the entire mystery realm was. Thousand source true fluid would appear here. Every day, when the sun and moon intersected, a drop of thousand source true fluid would fall from the eagle's beak on the mountain, causing intense competition. However, after the ancient site opened, thousand source true fluid would only appear after about 3 months. Moreover, it would only last for 10 days. After tens of thousands of years, this pattern was naturally known by everyone. Everyone guessed that when the ancient site opened, some kind of change would occur, and this change would slowly form thousand source true fluid. As for the specifics, no one knew. Calculating the time, there were still a few days until the 3-month deadline. Ling Han sized up this tall mountain, and he suddenly had a strong urge to run up it. Chapter 1189. It was a simple principle. If one could occupy the position of the eagle's beak, the thousand source true fluid wouldn't appear so easily. However, if it were that simple, would there still be people waiting at the foot of the mountain? They would definitely be fighting each other to occupy the most advantageous position. This Eagle Mountain was not easy to climb. Ling Han knew after trying it out. There was a frightening gale on the mountain, and even his divine body couldn't withstand it. He had just advanced, and a great many wounds had already appeared on his body. If he stayed for a while longer, he would definitely be reduced to a skeleton. If the gales became stronger the higher he climbed, he wouldn't even be able to keep his skeleton. Instead, he would be sliced into pieces, and his body and spirit would be destroyed. Is it really impossible to climb up? Because there were still a few days left, Ling Han began to try to resist the gales. However, he quickly came to a conclusion. The higher he climbed, the more destructive the gales would be. It wasn't a power attack. If the gales were too powerful, they would be blown down. However, he hadn't been blown down the mountain. He had merely been severely injured. This meant that the gales were the power of regulations. Thus, although their power was ordinary, their destructive power was incredibly terrifying. At least comparable to the medium extreme of the Sun-Moon tier. Otherwise, they couldn't have cut my skin with a single blow. Ling Han speculated. However, this was only the foot of the mountain. If it continued like this, he could use the indestructible Heaven's Scroll to go against the wind. Forget it. I'll just wait here. With my current battle prowess, it shouldn't be difficult to obtain a few drops of Thousand Source True Fluid. The three of them found a remote place. This way, they could enter the Black Tower without anyone noticing. Ling Han cultivated and comprehended alchemy simultaneously. When he had time, he would also refine a few cauldrons of 7 ultimate flying flame pills. This was a good way to earn money. After a few more days, the crowd became uneasy. The reason was simple. The 3 months were almost up, and the fiercest competition was about to begin. Even heavenly body tier elites would be tempted by the Thousand Source True Fluid. If they obtained a drop and didn't use it themselves, they would sell it for an astronomical price. Oh, that's right. Say, Senior, do you have any Thousand Source True Fluid that you can give me? Ling Han asked the notionless saint, who was wrapped around the reincarnation tree. You're a saint, so you're definitely more powerful than an Eternal River tier elite, right? My main body has already refined the body, so where would the Thousand Source True Fluid come from? Notionless saint harumphed. Besides, there's no way a saint can produce the Thousand Source True Fluid. If the body doesn't melt, then a saint bug will appear. Sigh, what a useless piece of trash, completely useless. Ling Han sighed, causing notionless saint to howl in anger. To think that he, a mighty saint, was actually being looked down upon by Ling Han. Ling Han asked Shui Yenyu and Hu Feiyin to stand off to the side. Once the fight for the drop began, it would be incredibly terrifying and cruel. Perhaps even if the 6 king tiers managed to obtain a drop, they would have no choice but to immediately flee. Otherwise, if they were ganged up on by everyone, they would definitely suffer. One had to realize that there were many powerful forces here that had nurtured special fighters. These fighters would sever their own cultivation level, then use forbidden alchemical pills to increase their power. Their battle prowess was infinitely close to the Sun-Moon tier, and they wouldn't be any weaker than those at the pinnacle level of the Mountain River tier. As expected, Gao Huang's greed knows no bounds. He actually wants me to bring 3 drops of Thousand Source True Fluid to him. I really don't know what's in his head. How could he make such a request? Ling Han shook his head. However, putting aside the fact that only 10 drops of Thousand Source True Fluid could be produced here, even if there were 100 or 1,000 drops, and he had already taken most of them, he definitely wouldn't give a single drop to Gao Huang. Why? Someone pointed at the summit of the mountain and said, the Thousand Source True Fluid is forming. Although this mountain was tall, everyone here was an immortal, and all of them possessed astonishing eyesight. They could clearly see that there was a drop of liquid forming near the eagle's beak. However, it wasn't large enough, so it hadn't fallen yet. Everyone instantly began to sharpen their weapons. Obtaining a drop of Thousand Source True Fluid could save them tens of thousands of years of hard work. Ling Han didn't move. After all, the mountain winds here were very unpredictable. Who knew which direction the drop of thousand source true fluid would drift to when it fell? If he tried to snatch a spot now, it would be completely ridiculous. Time passed slowly, and the droplet of water grew larger at a steady pace. After an entire day, the drop of liquid finally reached the size of a pinky finger. It trembled slightly, and then broke free from the boulder before floating down. Whoosh! A gust of mountain wind blew over, and the drop of liquid instantly changed direction. Ling Han attacked. Pang! He stomped his foot, and a burst of astonishing speed erupted from his body. The terrifying thing about body cultivators was the speed at which they could activate and the explosive speed they could unleash in a short period of time. Xiao! He was as fast as lightning. He was far too powerful now, and he didn't even need to move. No one could stop him. Instead, the gust of wind he created powerful waves that knocked everyone around him off their feet. This was the ultimate power. 9 stars. At this moment, it was time for the 8 immortals to display their respective abilities. The elderly cultivators consumed the forbidden medicine, and their power began to soar. They were close to the sun-moon tier, and then they also charged over, chasing after the drop of thousand source true fluid. In the face of such power, even cultivators at the consummate level of the mountain river tier were completely powerless. They would be crushed into pieces with a single collision. No one cared about others. What a joke. With the thousand source true fluid right in front of them, who would care about others? Moreover, wasn't everyone here for the thousand source true fluid? Thus, standing here was equivalent to participating in the competition. It wouldn't be unreasonable for them to be sent flying or even crushed into pieces. Competition for treasures in martial art had always been intertwined with blood and death. Ling Han wasn't too bad. He had no intention of going on a killing spree, and he merely repelled everyone and restrained his power. In comparison, those who had severed their cultivation and consumed the forbidden medicine were much more ruthless. They didn't care about anything at all. They had severed their cultivation, which was equivalent to severing their lifespan. Although their clans and sects would definitely compensate them, it would be ridiculous if their mental state could remain the same as before. Thus, some people even deliberately killed others to vent their anger and resentment on others. The drop of thousand source true fluid had already fallen to the foot of the mountain, and it was the closest to a gray-robed elder. He laughed loudly, and said, "I'll accept this drop of divine fluid. Wait for another day." He stretched out his hand to grab it. Once he stored it in his spatial spirit tool, he would immediately flee far away. He definitely wouldn't stay here any longer. There was a limit to how long the pill could last, and his power could only last for half a month at most. Moreover, since it was a forbidden pill, it would definitely be extremely destructive to one's body. Taking one pill in 100 years was already his limit. If he took 2 in succession, he would be completely courting death. Xiao! A cold light streaked past, as fast as lightning. It was the annihilating dragon star arrow. The gray-robed elder had no choice but to raise his hand to block it. However, this arrow was imbued with a powerful force, and his body was immediately knocked off course, away from the drop of divine fluid. Damn it! The elder stomped the ground forcefully, and his body returned to its original position. He stretched out his hand to grab it again. However, with this delay, a few elites nearby had already rushed over, and they also began to fight over the drop of divine fluid. Chapter 1190. Powerful existences appeared one after another, each displaying their own abilities. Right now, there were only 8 people who had reached the pinnacle level of the mountain river tier. However, Hu Feiyin didn't participate in the competition, so there were only 7 people left. In theory, the 7 of them should be the strongest, but that was only in theory. There were also many people who had severed their own cultivation. There were actually over 100 of them, and each of them was no weaker than the 7 king tiers. Added with the fact that they had once advanced to the sun-moon tier and grasped stronger regulations of heaven and earth, their battle prowess was incredibly powerful. There wasn't even a need for 100 people. Only 10 people were needed to team up, and even Shinju, Shirangwa, and the other young king tiers would have to frown and retreat temporarily. They would have to wait until the medicinal effects of their opponents disappeared before forcefully suppressing them. These hundreds of people fought, and the scene immediately became chaotic. However, Shinju, Wuangwa, and the others still displayed their superior prowess. Everyone's strength was about the same, but that didn't mean that their battle prowess was the same. This also depended on the techniques that they had mastered. A king tier was a king tier after all. Their cultivation levels were similar, but their battle prowess was a level higher. Apart from Wu Zhe, who was slightly weaker, the other 5 all charged at the very front, blasting away the others as they fought for the drop of thousand source true fluid. Scram! An elder stretched out a hand and pressed it down on Ling Han. Power that was close to the sun-moon tier vibrated. This was the highest power that this place could contain. At least, this was the case for outsiders. Anyone who exceeded this power would be targeted by the restrictions. It's almost invincible. You're already so old, yet you're still so blunt with your words. You're really asking for a beating. Ling Han humphed. He unsheathed his divine demon sword and unleashed the lightning sword technique. What? The old man let out a muffled groan. His body had already been struck by the sword, and he was instantly sent flying. He turned pale with fright. This sword was too fast. He almost didn't catch the sword light's trajectory before he was cut down. Furthermore, the destructive power of this sword was extremely shocking. It tore apart his elemental energy shield and entered his flesh. Hiss, if they were to face each other head-on, the other party would definitely be able to cut him into pieces with a dozen or so sword strikes. How is that possible? So fast and so strong, how could they fuse together? Before he could even finish his thought, Ling Han had already charged over. Peng, peng, peng. After a few slashes, even more elites were sent flying, causing him to break out in a cold sweat. He felt that no matter how many times he tried, he would not be able to break through. Unless he was a lot stronger or had an advantage in numbers, he would definitely not be able to win in a one-on-one battle. Moreover, he would lose very quickly. Ling Han had been invincible all along the way, and had become the 7th young king tier in this place. Among the others, he should be ranked 6th. He was clearly stronger than Wu Zhe, because Wu Zhe had not been able to have such an overwhelming advantage when fighting against veteran elites. Damn it! Several of the veteran experts who had been sent flying were infuriated, and they launched a counterattack. All kinds of light danced chaotically, interweaving with each other as they attacked Ling Han. Ling Han laughed heartily, and simply borrowed their attacks to increase his speed. Peng, he was like a human cannonball, instantly blasting away the dozen or so people in front of him. Bearing the combined strength of quite a few experts, this collision of his was naturally extremely terrifying. Peng, 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 peng. The crowd was sent flying like flowers scattered by heavenly maidens. However, Ling Han acted as if nothing had happened, and he continued to charge forward. The people nearby were all stunned. What kind of fighting style was this? He was like a fucking human-shaped weapon. Was there really such an exaggeration? After being bombarded by a series of attacks, he borrowed the force of the attacks to charge forward and knock away all those in his way. With this kind of defense, he was practically an undying monster. Who could injure him? Ling Han had already charged into the core of the battlefield. This was the battlefield of He Tao, Shinju, and the others. They continued to fight over the drop of divine liquid, yet none of them could succeed. Due to the collisions of all kinds of attacks, the divine liquid continued to bounce around in the sky. Humph. Shinju, and the others were extremely displeased that there was another competitor, and they attacked without holding back. Although they had already reached an agreement to work together to open a treasure trove in the end, they were still competitors before this. However, they all had a bottom line, and they definitely wouldn't kill the other 6 people. Ling Han laughed heartily. He completely disregarded the attacks of the 6 people, and he directly grabbed that drop of thousand source true fluid. His physique was freakish, and he could do as he pleased. Peng, 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 peng. Countless attacks blasted toward him, yet Ling Han didn't even try to block them. However, these attacks only tore his clothes into shreds, and left a few bloody marks on his skin. Fuck. The 5 king tiers attacked together, yet they were only able to scratch Ling Han's skin a little. Everyone was petrified. Meanwhile, Ling Han took advantage of the chaos to snatch the flying drop of thousand source true fluid and put it into his black tower. Hand it over. The 5 king tiers attacked in unison. Hurry up and hand it over. More veteran elites also attacked from the periphery. Their attacks covered the sky, and it was as if the heavens were collapsing. It was an incredibly terrifying scene. Ling Han couldn't even be bothered to parry the attacks, and he simply crossed his arms over his chest. Divine patterns intertwined with the attacks, creating a dazzling scene. Any one of these attacks was close to the level of the Sun-Moon tier. With so many attacks raining down at once, even an elite at the low extreme of the Sun-Moon tier would pale in fright. He definitely wouldn't dare to face them head-on. However, Ling Han didn't dodge or evade, and took all of the attacks head-on. Boom! The earth trembled, and shockwaves surged. The sky was filled with dust. They saw that Ling Han had been sent flying. However, when he landed on the ground, everyone discovered to their astonishment that there were only some superficial wounds on his body. Putting aside the fact that he hadn't been smashed into smithereens, there wasn't even a single bone in his body that was broken. You want me to hand it over? That'll depend on whether you have the strength to do so. Ling Han laughed loudly, and said, Come, I don't mind playing with you all. You're being targeted by so many elites, yet you're actually just playing around? How arrogant. However, everyone had to admit that his physique was monstrous. What had just happened was clear proof. Even when 100 or so king tiers attacked him simultaneously, he was still completely unscathed. Then, who could truly threaten him? The 5 king tiers stopped first, and the other elites also stopped one after another. There was no point in continuing to fight, as they couldn't possibly snatch back the thousand source true fluid from Ling Han's hands. I'm done, Ling Han said with a grin, and sat down on the ground. Why haven't you left yet? Someone asked. According to convention, those who had obtained thousand source true fluid would immediately leave. This was because it was far too dangerous to stay. They would be surrounded and attacked by others, and they wouldn't be a match for them no matter how powerful they were. Moreover, those who could obtain thousand source true fluid were definitely elites. If such an elite left, there would be one less competitor, which would be beneficial to the remaining people. This was the convention. Why should I leave? Ling Han asked with a smile. His physique was invincible, so he could naturally stay and fight for more thousand source true fluid. After all, there was no rule stating that he had to leave after obtaining a single drop. Chapter 1192. Ling Han was very powerful, truly very powerful. However, facing several dozen pseudo-Sun-Moon tier elites, as well as 3 young king tiers, he was unable to break out of their encirclement. He was forcefully trapped, and only when the thousand source true fluid was claimed did everyone release their encirclement. When the 5th drop of divine fluid appeared, the other half of the group began to surround him, and those who had previously surrounded him began to fight over it. Ling Han was dumbfounded. He had actually become public enemy number 1, and everyone was targeting him. Fuck, how could they be so shameless? Even further away, those who weren't qualified to compete for the divine fluid were all filled with admiration for Ling Han. He was only one person, yet he was able to force all the elites to team up against him. In fact, Half of the elites had been sent to surround him, and even the young King Tears had participated. This showed just how powerful Ling Han was. Even Yang Hao hadn't received such treatment in the past. He had no choice but to retreat after being ganged up on. At least in the mountain river tier, Ling Han had already surpassed Yang Hao. In fact, he could even be considered the strongest person in history. The 6th drop, the 7th drop. The elites continued to switch shifts, firmly trapping Ling Han in place. With so many people suppressing him together, although they could only inflict a small wound on Ling Han, they were completely capable of trapping him. How depressing. How did you guys suddenly become so united? Ling Han was extremely displeased, but the others didn't give him a chance. They continued to switch shifts until the 10th drop of divine fluid appeared. Those who had stopped him in the first round were no longer willing to give up. This was because the 11th drop of divine fluid hadn't appeared, and if they tried to stop Ling Han again, they would lose a round. The scene became chaotic again. Ling Han laughed loudly. This was what he had been waiting for. As he charged forward, he was invincible. Even veteran elites were sent flying by a single strike of his sword. If he encountered young King Tears, he would just have to take their attacks head-on. After a fierce battle, Ling Han successfully obtained the 4th drop of Thousand Source True Fluid, setting a new record. A single person had managed to obtain close to half of the divine liquid. This was a miracle, and perhaps no one would be able to make another breakthrough in the future. However, as long as this mystery realm still existed, Ling Han's achievements today had to be mentioned when talking about the Thousand Source True Fluid. It was clearly impossible to snatch the divine liquid from Ling Han. Who could break through his defenses? Here, even the power of the decree was restricted. Ling Han's defense was unbreakable. Thus, everyone merely cast a deep and meaningful glance at Ling Han before swaggering off. Even more people were calculating in their hearts. This was a super genius that was slowly rising up, and his future accomplishments would definitely not be inferior to Yang Hao's. Should they make friends with him? Brother Ling, let's meet at the appointed place. Shenju, He Tao, and the others left one after another. King Tears were indeed King Tears. Among the 6 of them, aside from Wu Zhe, everyone had obtained a drop of Thousand Source True Fluid, which was worthy of their strength. However, Wu Zhe had only broken through to the pinnacle realm not long ago, and his strength was much weaker than before. This time, he had gained nothing. However, the 6 King Tears only had one more drop of Thousand Source True Fluid than Ling Han. In comparison, they naturally paled in comparison. Ling Han nodded at them. Competing was one thing, but opening the treasure trove in the future was a completely different matter. Ling Han had always been in favor of healthy competition, as long as one didn't use underhanded methods. Han Lin, 8 people, appeared. 7 of them were extremely young, while the last one was an elder. He was an elite that had severed his own cultivation level. At this time, he had consumed a forbidden alchemical pill, and his power had almost reached the Sun-Moon tier. The aura that he exuded was extremely terrifying. Moreover, this was because he was suppressing his power. Otherwise, he should have been able to reach the Sun-Moon tier. If that were the case, his battle prowess would have undergone a qualitative leap. Why was it said that even the power of 9 stars couldn't contend against a Sun-Moon tier elite, and that one had to have 10 stars? It was because advancing 1 star would cause an earth-shattering change in one's power. Without reaching 10 stars, one could only be considered pseudo-Sun-Moon tier. You've done very well, the elder said, his expression slightly arrogant. Who are you guys? You look like you know each other very well, and your tone is clearly that of a senior. Aren't you a bit too shameless? Young master will be very satisfied, the elder continued. Now, you can give me 3 drops of Thousand Source True Fluid. So they were from the Gao faction. Ling Han finally understood. No wonder they felt so good about themselves. So it turned out that they were Gao Huang's subordinates. He couldn't help but laugh, and said, "What are your brains made of? Why should I give you the divine fluid?" The elder humphed, and said, Han Lin, don't think that you're invincible here. If I truly unleash my might, your meager power won't be enough. Gao Huang had only casually asked Ling Han to give him 3 drops of thousand source true fluid. Even if Ling Han gave him 1 drop of divine fluid, it would be enough to make him extremely satisfied. However, who would have thought that Ling Han would actually be so freakish? He had obtained as many as 4 drops of divine fluid. This was something that even the elder couldn't believe. His name was Shi Ming, and he could be considered a senior of the Gao faction. He had also entered the Yellow Spring Mystery Realm several times, but he had never obtained a single drop of thousand source true fluid. If he brought back 3 drops of divine fluid this time, he would naturally have made a great contribution, and his life would be considered over. However, he still had descendants, and these descendants would probably receive the care of the Gao faction. They would have incredibly bright futures. For the sake of his descendants, he had to force Ling Han to submit. Ling Han smiled faintly, and asked, "Are you threatening me?" "It's not a threat, it's the truth." Shi Ming humphed coldly, and said, "If I unleash my might, my battle prowess will advance to the Sun-Moon tier. However, if I use the power of the Sun-Moon tier here, it's possible that I'll be killed." "Oh, so you mean that you're not afraid of death?" Ling Han asked. Shi Ming laughed loudly, and said, "Who wouldn't be afraid of death? It's just that I have the resolve to die, but do you?" He had already placed all his hopes on his descendants. Thus, he would not hesitate to die to pave the way for his descendants. Ling Han couldn't help but sigh, and said, "I find that you're quite pitiful. You've worked hard for others all your life, and never once have you lived for yourself. Don't talk about this with me." Shi Ming pointed at Ling Han, and said, "Immediately hand over 3 drops of divine fluid, and I'll allow you to keep 1. You're still young, and have plenty of opportunities to enter this place, or even other historical sites. There's no need for you to give up your life here." Ling Han shook his head, and said with a smile, "Now even bandits have become so considerate. Unfortunately, no matter what you say, it can't change your nature as a bandit. Since you're so stubborn." Shi Ming took a deep breath, and revealed an expression of determination. He was going to use the true power of the Sun-Moon tier to suppress Ling Han, even if he would be targeted by the restrictions. He had the resolve to do so. "I'll send you on your way." He moved. Hung, the power that belonged to the Sun-Moon tier finally burst forth. Multiple divine patterns intertwined, and instantly broke through the hundreds. This was a qualitative change. Even those at the pinnacle level of the Mountain River tier could only possess 99 divine patterns, and only those at the Sun-Moon tier could master more than 100 divine patterns. The difference was that there was a qualitative difference between the divine patterns of the Sun-Moon tier and ordinary Mountain River tier, but the 99 divine patterns of the pinnacle level of the Mountain River tier were of the same quality as those of the Sun-Moon tier. They were more complex, and they were more powerful. This was the materialization of the regulations of heaven and earth. Different cultivation levels meant different qualities. Chapter 1193. Shi Ming didn't mind being targeted by the restrictions, and unleashed his full battle prowess, displaying his might at the low extreme of the Sun-Moon tier. In this mystery realm, this was definitely invincible power. Peng with a single strike, Ling Han was sent flying. He felt as if his body was boiling, and it was extremely uncomfortable. Even though he had the power of 9 stars now, which was only a tiny bit away from the limit of 10 stars, this tiny bit was a natural chasm. 9 stars belonged to the power of the Mountain River tier, and 10 stars belonged to the Sun-Moon tier. No matter how freakish Ling Han was, he couldn't make up for the difference in power between the Mountain River tier and the Sun-Moon tier. This time, he didn't have the lion seal to use. Moreover, even if he did, he wouldn't dare to use it. The restrictions here targeted the power of the Sun-Moon tier, and he didn't want to be targeted. So what if you had the power of the Sun-Moon tier? As long as you were in the low extreme, you could only make him spit blood at most. If you wanted to pose a real threat to him, you had to be in the medium extreme. Ling Han climbed up as if nothing had happened, patted the dust off his body, and said with a smile, "You're indeed stronger than before, but it's far from enough to hurt me, fuck." Shi Ming's eyes almost popped out in shock. His full power attack was blocked just like that. That was the attack of the Sun Moon tier, and it should be able to kill all Mountain River tier cultivators, but why couldn't it do anything to Ling Han? Monster, definitely a monster. Ah! Shi Ming screamed in pain. His attack of the Sun Moon tier was immediately targeted by the restrictions here. Pu. His whole body was covered in blood, and he instantly became a man of blood. However, this pain brought him back to his senses, and he glared at Ling Han resentfully, exuding killing intent. He wanted to kill this prodigy to pave the way for his descendants. Die. He was bathed in blood, and he attacked Ling Han. His blood essence burned, resisting the restrictions, and giving him enough power to suppress Ling Han. Ling Han shook his head. Aside from himself, no one knew how strong his physique was. The power of the low extreme of the Sun Moon tier wanted to kill him. Not enough. Ling Han attacked, and the divine demon sword released endless light as he battled Shi Ming. Bang 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 every time Shi Ming attacked, he was able to send Ling Han flying. This was a suppression in terms of cultivation level. However, Ling Han would only spit out a few mouthfuls of blood at most. Shi Ming, on the other hand, was in an even worse state. His internal organs, godly bones, and meridians were constantly injured by the restrictions. Pa! When it came to the 20th move, he threw a punch, yet his entire arm exploded, turning into a rain of blood and bone fragments that filled the sky. The power of the Sun Moon tier was too powerful, and this rain of blood possessed terrifying destructive power. There were still a few members of the Gao faction standing nearby. When they were swept by this rain of blood, they were instantly turned into bloody sieves. Only one person was lucky enough to survive, while the others were all killed in an instant. Shi Ming, on the other hand, had already entered a demonic barrier. He only had one thought in his mind now, and that was to kill Ling Han. Thus, he ignored the injuries on his body, and continued to bombard Ling Han madly. Pa! Another of his arms exploded, and he became an armless man. He still didn't stop attacking. His legs moved, and he kicked at Ling Han. Pa! It wasn't long before Shi Ming's legs also exploded into a rain of blood. However, he still blew out a breath of air, and his body bounced back into the air. He charged at Ling Han again, looking as if he was determined to kill Ling Han. Even Ling Han felt some sympathy. Should this kind of person be pitied or hated? Pa! He didn't need to move. The restrictions had already exploded Shi Ming's body into pieces, but his eyes were still fixed on Ling Han, and he was about to unleash his final attack. However, he didn't manage to unleash this attack in the end, because his head had also exploded into pieces. Sun Moon tier cultivators could already be considered elites, yet he had died without a complete corpse. The remaining members of the Gao faction were so scared that they almost wet their pants. Trembling, they turned around and fled. This place was too dangerous. He wanted to directly run back to the entrance and wait for Venerable Trinity to open the mystery realm. He really didn't want to stay here for a moment longer. Ling Han sheathed his sword, shook his head, and walked toward Shui Yanyu and Hu Feiyan. If he trampled on profligate young masters, he would still feel some pleasure. For example, when he stepped on Gao Huang's face one day, he would definitely be in a very good mood. However, Shi Ming made him feel a little rueful, and his heart was a little heavy. This kind of person doesn't deserve sympathy, but there's no need to hate him either. Ling Han collected his thoughts, smiled at Shui Yanyu and Hu Feiyan, and said, "Let's go." Hu Feiyan bit into a fruit, and said with a lisp, "Ling Han, you're so greasy." Previously, Ling Han had killed his way in and out of the chaotic army, and her blood had been boiling. She was extremely in awe of Ling Han. Of course. Ling Han laughed loudly, and his mood couldn't help but improve slightly. The three of them walked for a while, and Ling Han suddenly felt a sense of danger. He suddenly stabbed his sword into the ground. Pooh! The sword light flashed and shot into the ground. Instantly, cracks appeared on the ground, spreading out like spider webs. Fuck you, you almost pierced through Grandpa Ginseng's chrysanthemum. A white figure shot out from the ground. Fuck your grandpa's treasured ginseng leg. Shwa! This white figure shot toward Ling Han. That despicable ginseng. He really came and went like a shadow. He wanted to ambush Ling Han, but he didn't expect Ling Han's divine intent to spread out. His sneak attack failed, and instead, Ling Han attacked first, almost stabbing him. Ling Han used the fast technique and stabbed toward the old ginseng. You want to kill Grandpa Ginseng? You're 10,000 years too early, the old ginseng shouted. His attacks were as quick as lightning, and regulations transformed into sabers, spears, and arrows, all of which shot toward Ling Han. Didn't you say I was 800 years too early last time? Ling Han said with a smile. Tui, that's because Grandpa Ginseng's strength has increased. The old ginseng darted into the sky and burrowed into the ground at an astonishing speed. Ling Han humphed, and said, if you don't obediently come into my bowl, then don't blame me for being impolite. You dare to threaten Grandpa Ginseng? I'll kick you to death. The old ginseng flew into a rage, and his attacks became even more intense. Ling Han didn't hold back anymore. Boom! Terrifying flames surged out of his body, and divine patterns intertwined. Fuck, Grandpa Ginseng hates fire the most. The old ginseng wailed. He hurriedly retreated a few dozen meters, and finally stopped attacking. Instead, he stood still, a look of fear on his face as he looked at the divine flames. He was only fast. The power of ice and divine flames could both restrain him. Despicable ginseng, what are you doing here again? Ling Han asked. The old ginseng sat down on a rock and crossed his legs, assuming an extremely lewd posture. Then, he said, Grandpa Ginseng wants to give you an opportunity. Tui, acting like a pervert with a straight face? Ling Han smiled, and said, oh. What opportunity can you give me? Are you planning to offer your body? Then hurry up and come into my bowl. Tui, Tui, Tui. Grandpa Ginseng isn't gay. Don't have any ideas about Grandpa Ginseng's chrysanthemum. The old ginseng immediately jumped up. Ling Han shook his head. This despicable ginseng had grown up in this mystery realm. Just how had he developed such a perverted character? Perverts were also born with, bring Grandpa Ginseng out of the mystery realm, and Grandpa Ginseng will gift you some divine liquid, the old ginseng stated his conditions. Chapter 1194. Oh. Ling Han was surprised and said, first of all, why do you want me to take you out? Don't you have 2 legs? Moreover, he ran very fast. Foolish human, don't you see that there are so many people standing guard outside? Some of them are even extremely powerful. If Grandpa Ginseng goes out, he'll definitely be captured and stewed into soup, the old ginseng said. You actually knew that there were elites outside? Ling Han clapped his hands, and said, so, when the mystery realm opened, you were already standing guard at the entrance. Originally, you wanted to leave, but when you discovered that there were heavenly body tier, or even eternal river tier, standing guard, you became afraid. In that case, this lowly ginseng might have been eyeing him a long time ago. Although Grandpa Ginseng is good at escaping, I'm still quite fearful of those lackeys outside. Grandpa Ginseng knows that you have a treasure on you that can contain living beings. Lend it to Grandpa Ginseng to hide for a while. Once we leave, Grandpa Ginseng will reward you with a peerless divine elixir. As Ling Han stared at him, he couldn't help but recall the look on Ling Han's face when he spoke of Shinju, Er's golden breasts. His expression darkened, and he said, "The peerless divine liquid you speak of isn't your saliva, right?" Although it could indeed be called a precious liquid, the difference between it and a peerless divine liquid was too great. The old ginseng couldn't help but blush. He coughed, and said, "Grandpa Ginseng is blessed by heaven and earth. My entire body is a treasure. Do you think just anyone can get my saliva? This old fart is really too much." Helping him get out of trouble, and the reward was a few mouthfuls of saliva. "Were you insulting him?" Ling Han bargained and said, "Give me half of it, and I'll take you away." "Brat, you're too greedy. You actually want to cut Grandpa Ginseng." The old ginseng exploded with rage. "This is your grandpa's treasured ginseng leg. I'll kick you awake." The man and the ginseng started fighting again. However, they stopped after a few moves. "One root at most," the old ginseng said. 100. Ling Han demanded an exorbitant price. "Scram! Grandpa Ginseng only has a total of 37 beards. Even if I pluck them all out, it won't be enough for you," the old ginseng shouted. 37 it is then," Ling Han readily agreed. "No, 2 at most." The old ginseng shook his head repeatedly. After bargaining for a while, they finally settled on 10 sticks. "By the way, what kind of breed are you?" Ling Han asked with a smile. "Brat, you dare to insult your Grandpa Ginseng." The old ginseng sent another kick flying over. Ling Han stretched out his hand to block, then nodded and said, "You don't have to say to know that it's either a rogue ginseng or a wicked ginseng. You're infuriating Grandpa Ginseng." The old ginseng stomped his foot. Then, he said, "Brat, swear a Tao oath." A Tao oath was an oath made to the great Tao of heaven and earth. There was the will of the heavens in the unseen world, and if one did not follow the oath, they would be punished by the heavens and earth. This was a great taboo, and no one dared to violate a Tao oath. Ling Han nodded and swore an oath. This was an oath to the heavens and earth. Even if he changed his identity, he would not be able to fool the heavens and earth. Only then did the old ginseng relax. He leaped onto Ling Han's shoulder, and said, "Brat, your luck isn't bad. You managed to pick up 2 beautiful girls." The old ginseng's lust was aroused again. Ling Han shook his head. This old ginseng came and went like a ghost, and he had discovered that he had used the Black Tower. Most likely, he had also observed him for a long time, and had acknowledged his character. That was why he had appeared at the Herb Mountain. Rogue Ginseng, when did you attain Tao? And why do you want to leave this place? Grandpa Ginseng swallowed the essence of heaven and earth, and obtained the essence of the sun and moon. Stop, stop, stop. Don't brag, get straight to the point, Ling Han hurriedly interrupted. The old ginseng was extremely displeased. Couldn't he be allowed to brag for a while? He muttered to himself for a long time, but finally spoke. Tens of thousands of years ago, he had awakened a hazy consciousness, and instinctively absorbed the essence of heaven and earth. He had begun to cultivate. However, it was only in the last few hundred years that he had finally grown a pair of hands and feet. He could break free from the shackles of the earth, and travel the world. However, this place was still too small. Moreover, as he grasped more and more regulations of heaven and earth, he discovered that this place was targeting him and devouring him. This made him feel a strong urge to leave. However, although this place would open twice every 100 years, with people entering and exiting once, there were as many elites as there were clouds outside. He didn't dare to act rashly, afraid that he would be turned into ginseng soup if he left. However, he definitely had to leave this time. He had a feeling that if he missed this opportunity, there wouldn't be a next time. He wouldn't be able to endure for another 100 years, and he would be killed by the backlash of the mystery realm. Ling Han couldn't help but slap his thigh, and say, "If I had known this would happen, I would have set the conditions more viciously." "Ha, you're still 20,000 years away from fighting with your Grandpa Ginseng," the old ginseng said smugly. Ling Han chuckled. Fortunately, Hunyo wasn't here. Otherwise, with how smug this old ginseng was, he would probably be stuffed into a pot by that glutton and turned into soup in the next second. Brat, don't laugh so creepily. Grandpa Ginseng's goosebumps are about to appear. The old ginseng shivered. Where did you get the goosebumps from? Hu Feiyun asked curiously. The old ginseng instantly glared at her, and said, Grandpa Ginseng is using a metaphor. Little girl, do you understand? You're not young, so why are you so stupid? Ling Han shook his head, and said, Your mouth is so cheap. Sooner or later, you'll suffer greatly. Pay. In the 9 heavens and 10 earths, Grandpa Ginseng is free and unfettered. As long as I leave this place, who can capture Grandpa Ginseng? The old ginseng said nonchalantly, appearing to be extremely confident. Ling Han cracked a smile, and said, In the future, I'll introduce you to someone. He couldn't wait to see the scene of Hunyo ravaging this old ginseng. For some reason, Ling Han believed that Hunyo would be able to subdue this old ginseng. The old ginseng was extremely quick-witted. When no one was around, he would brag and chat with Ling Han. Occasionally, he would also tease Shui Yenyu and Hu Feiyun. However, he would naturally be struck by Ling Han's sword until he cried out in pain. When outsiders came, he would burrow into the ground. In this place, no one would be able to discover him. Brat, you're going to the final treasure trove? The old ginseng's expression became grave when he learned about the destination of Ling Han's journey. That's not a good place. There were a few times when Grandpa Ginseng passed by that place, and I would tremble with fear. Oh. Do you know the specifics? Although Ling Han had the Black Tower, and was confident that he could stay alive, the Black Tower wasn't omnipotent. If he was trapped there, it wouldn't be fun. The old ginseng shook his head, and said, That place is filled with an aura of death. Grandpa Ginseng can't be bothered to go there. How would I know? Ling Han pondered for a moment, but still decided to go. Firstly, he had already promised someone, so he couldn't break his promise. Secondly, he was also curious. After passing through Eagle Mountain, the environment here became desolate. One could see the aftermath of a great battle everywhere. The mountains that had been flattened showed just how intense the battle had been. This was a mountain range of the immortal realm, and it was extremely sturdy. Now, it had been completely wiped out. The person who had done this had to be incredibly powerful. There were no demonic beasts or godly medicines. There was only a yellow spring surging in the sky. Chapter 1196. A Beautiful Romance. Numerous balls of light floated in the palace. If one looked closely, they would see that there were actually countless words moving about within the balls of light. However, the words were indistinct, and they weren't very clear. Those are all cultivation techniques and inheritances. I think I've found the Great Net Calming Heart Technique. Purple Smoke Palm Technique. Bamboo Heart Sword. The 7 of them stared at the balls of light and spoke. The words in some of the balls of light were easier to read. What? I once found an incomplete copy of the Good Plains Heart Sutra in an ancient sect. This is an incredible cultivation technique. Even that ancient sect only had an incomplete copy. It said that after one cultivates this technique, their origin power will be imbued with the power of lightning, and they will be able to easily break through their opponent's defenses. He Tao exclaimed in surprise. This was an ancient cultivation technique that had been passed down for tens of thousands of years. It had been lost a long time ago, and only bits and pieces of it could be found in some ancient inheritances. Was this a complete ancient cultivation technique, or was it just an incomplete copy? If it was complete, this cultivation technique would be extremely valuable. Now, everyone knew that this was indeed a treasure trove. Its value was unimaginable. Xiao. Shenzhu leaped into the air and grabbed one of the balls of light. Her speed was extremely fast, and she quickly neared the ball of light. Just as she was about to grab the ball of light suddenly started to move. Furthermore, its speed was even faster than before, and it escaped at the last moment. Shenju had used up all of her momentum in this leap, and her figure started to fall. She returned empty-handed. The remaining 6 people were all astonished. Shenju wasn't any weaker than any of them, yet her attack had failed. In that case, they might not be able to succeed either. It wouldn't be easy to obtain these inheritances. The 7 of them didn't speak anymore. Instead, they stared at the secret techniques that they had been struck by, and then reached out to grab them. At this moment, the balls of light in the air seemed to have come to life. They swam about like fish, and their movements were chaotic, dazzling the onlookers' eyes. After this round of grabbing, the 7 of them stopped one after another. When the last person also stopped, the balls of light also stopped, and they hung in the air like stars. This was really difficult to deal with. The 7 of them frowned. Although they were all king tiers of the younger generation, they were in a difficult situation. Shio, shio, shio. However, right at that moment, the 7 balls of light suddenly trembled. Then, they shot rapidly towards the 7 of them. Ling Han's group of 7 hurriedly stretched out their hands to grab them. Pa, pa, pa. Each of them easily grabbed a ball of light. What was going on? Previously, they couldn't catch him no matter how hard they tried. But now, he took the initiative to throw himself into their arms. Pa! 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 The balls of light shattered one by one, and countless words and pictures appeared in the minds of the 7. They corresponded to various cultivation techniques and martial techniques. Ling Han did not know what the others had obtained, but he had obtained a movement technique called star-chasing steps. When it reached the peak, it could step into the 9 heavens with a single step, pluck the stars and grab the moon. Of course, this was a little exaggerated, but it also showed how extraordinary this movement technique was. As for how far one could cultivate it, that would depend on one's luck and comprehension. He went through this movement technique in his mind, and felt that it was incredibly complicated. He would definitely not be able to understand it in a short period of time. He would need to spend at least a few years, or even a dozen years, or even a few decades on it. This was the case for all god-level cultivation techniques. Formations, pill recipes, and now, movement techniques all required a very, very long time to comprehend, grasp, and use. However, Ling Han was not shocked. Instead, he was delighted. He had the reincarnation tree, so time was not a problem. Moreover, the longer he needed to comprehend a movement technique, the more precious and valuable it was. Shenju, and the others also revealed expressions of delight. It was clear that they had each obtained an extraordinary secret technique. They all raised their heads to look at the balls of light in the sky, and expressions of determination appeared on their faces. Any random ball of light that descended was a supreme secret technique. If they could obtain all of them, their value would be indescribably high. However, no more balls of light descended. It was as if giving them one was their reward for opening this place. The 7 of them started to chase after the balls of light again. Of course, they all failed. When they finally stopped, they did not see a second batch of balls of light descend. This disappointed them greatly. The treasure mountain was right in front of them, but they could not find a way to enter it. How hateful! He, do you want more cultivation techniques? A voice suddenly rang out. It was faint, and it seemed as if the voice was right beside their ears. However, it also seemed as if it was far away. Who is it? The 7 king tiers were all shocked, and they shouted fiercely. Show yourself. Don't sneak around. Do you want to see me so badly? The voice drifted through the air again. Wisps of black aura floated through the air. This aura was the same as the black aura outside. Furthermore, there was an additional aura of death in this aura. This aura condensed into a humanoid figure that appeared in the center of the 7 king tiers. Who are you? Angua immediately asked. I am naturally the master of this place, the gaseous figure replied. Ling Han and the others looked at each other. They all bowed and said, Greetings, senior. They were all proud individuals, so they naturally would not kneel. However, it was a fact that they had obtained this person's secret technique, so it was only right for them to bow. The gaseous figure raised a hand. His figure was not stable, and it continuously fluttered and twisted. You are all outstanding geniuses. You are qualified to receive my supreme inheritance. Thank you, senior. The 7 king tiers bowed again. However, I only need a successor. Which one of you is willing to take me as your master? The gaseous figure asked again. Ling Han and the others looked at each other again. They all asked, who does senior want to take as his disciple? Although this gaseous figure claimed to be the master of this place, should they believe him just because he said so? The 7 king tiers naturally had their own opinions since they were able to become king tiers. How could they easily trust others? If you want me to choose. The gaseous figure purposefully paused, and swept his gaze over the 7 king tiers. It was as if he was waiting for their reaction. However, how could Ling Han and the others lose their composure? Their expressions were calm, and they weren't nervous at all. Him. The gaseous figure stretched out a finger, and fixed it on Ling Han. Ling Han shook his head, and said, Apologies, I have no intention of taking him as my master. Even if he wanted to take him as his master, there was already a saint in the Black Tower. There was no need for him to take this person as his master. The gaseous figure couldn't help but look surprised. Ling Han was actually able to refuse his good intentions. To most people, taking an elite as their master was an irresistible temptation. However, Ling Han shook his head without any hesitation. The gaseous figure swept his gaze over them, and pointed at Shinju. What about you? Are you willing to take me as your master? Shinju hesitated slightly, and said, I already have a master, and I have no intention of taking him as my master. He had been rejected again. The gaseous figure grimaced. He had been dealt a heavy blow, and he asked, What about the rest of you? He pointed at the remaining 5 king tiers. The 5 king tiers all shook their heads at each other. The gaseous figure had offered them such an enticing offer to take them as his master, and this caused the 7 of them to become suspicious. Chapter 1197. The gaseous figure was a little annoyed, and even more so a little unable to accept this. There were 7 of them, yet not a single one was willing to acknowledge him as their master. Did they all think that they were Genesis tier saints? He said calmly, Since none of you are willing to acknowledge me as your master, then the secret techniques of this place are not fated to be with you. He paused for a moment, and looked at the 7 of them again. A smug expression appeared on his face when he saw that everyone's eyes were twitching slightly. He didn't believe that these juniors would still be able to keep their hearts and resist the temptation when there were so many secret techniques in front of them. However, these secret techniques are useless to me, so there's no harm in giving them all to you, the gaseous figure continued. He paused again as he spoke. He was always stuck at crucial moments. Ling Han took the lead, and said, Come, what conditions do you have, senior? The gaseous figure smiled, and said, It's not really a condition. I've already transformed into Tao, and all that's left behind is a wisp of my will. It's impossible for me to pluck those secret techniques even if I want to. Thus, I need one of you to act as my body in order to pluck those secret techniques. Whoever wants these secret techniques will have to lend their body to me. Otherwise, there's nothing I can do. A solemn expression appeared on Ling Han and the others' faces when they heard this. Wasn't this possession? It sounded nice, and they could borrow the body to pluck the secret technique light orb. However, what if he didn't retreat in the end? Moreover, he said that he had already transformed into Tao, and only left behind a wisp of his will. However, could this be guaranteed? If this was a remnant soul, then allowing it to enter their body would be equivalent to sending a lamb into a tiger's den. Who wants the secret techniques? The gaseous figure asked, his voice filled with temptation. Ling Han and the others didn't say anything, and they all assumed defensive stances. Although this gaseous figure had acted very courteous from the get-go, who knew if he would fly into a rage out of humiliation after being rejected? Is there no one? The gaseous human asked again. When he saw that Ling Han and the others didn't seem to have any intention of answering him, he couldn't help but sigh, and say, I originally wanted to use the easier method, but now, I can only use the harder method. His eyes swept over, and he pointed at Ling Han, and said, You are the physical body most suited to me. The toughness of your physique is something that even I have never seen before. Being able to cultivate to this level at the mountain river tier is something that has never been seen before. Your divine sense is also astonishingly tough, and I am not confident that I can erase it. Thank you for your praise, Senior. It's just that Senior seems to be a bit short-sighted. The world is so big, and there are so many capable people, Ling Han said indifferently. The other party had tried to be polite before resorting to force. He had first used a secret art like candy to attract people, but when he realized that no one had fallen for it, he had begun to use a big stick. Since that was the case, there was no need for Ling Han to be polite. Moreover, the other party had tempted him with benefits. What did that mean? This gaseous figure definitely wasn't as powerful as an Eternal River Tier elite. Otherwise, why would he need to trick Mountain River Tier cultivators like them? However, the gaseous figure didn't get angry. He merely shook his head, and said, I have roamed the world for countless years, so what prodigies haven't I seen? Ha! He then turned to Shinju, and said, I can sense a powerful bloodline in this little girl's body. It's a pity, what a pity. Her divine sense is protected by a secret art, and with my current strength, I can't shake it. He pointed out the strengths of each of the 7 cultivators, causing all 7 of them to feel astonished. This person's judgment was far too brilliant. His words weren't wrong at all. In the end, the gaseous figure pointed at Wu Zhe, and said, You are the weakest, and your talent is also the worst. You aren't the best vessel for my soul. However, you are the easiest to occupy, so I won't be picky. After saying this, the gaseous figure suddenly transformed into a streak of light that shot toward Wu Zhe. Wu Zhe was naturally prepared for this, and he hurriedly crossed his palms, raising his power to the peak. Close to 90 divine patterns appeared, and they tightly wrapped around him. Because he didn't know what this gaseous figure was, he didn't hope to be successful. He only hoped that he wouldn't make any mistakes. He wanted to protect himself first. Divine patterns flashed. These were the regulations of heaven and earth, and they were also the might of the pinnacle level. However, they were completely useless against this strange gas. This gas passed through his defenses and entered through Wu Zhe's mouth. Ah! Wu Zhe instantly screamed. He spread his arms and legs, and he raised his head to look up. The gas was endlessly entering his mouth, forming a cloud above his head. It was an incredibly strange sight. Humph! Ling Han and the others naturally wouldn't stand idly by. They all drew their god tools and slashed at the gas above them. Gagaga, you think you can harm me with just your strength? Who knows how many epochs you've passed? A voice sounded from the gas, directly entering their minds. This was a voice transmission through their divine sense. No matter how the 6 king tiers attacked, the gas only continued to change shape. They couldn't harm this mysterious being at all. This gas was also endlessly entering Wu Zhe's body, causing his stomach to swell up at a speed visible to the naked eye. In just a short period of time, Wu Zhe's stomach had already become bigger than a wok of oil. It was as if he had become a super fatty, and his expression was one of extreme pain. The veins on his face were pulsing, and his eyeballs looked like they were about to pop out of their sockets. The shape of his face was also changing. One moment, it was himself, and the next moment, it was another face. It was incredibly strange. Xiao. At this moment, the last bit of gas entered Wuxia's mouth, and his stomach suddenly returned to its original state. It was as if what had just happened was just an illusion. He looked blankly at Ling Han and the others. He stretched out his hand, and was just about to say something, when he suddenly grabbed his own head, and screamed again. A terrifying aura surged out from his body. It was sinister, evil, and filled with an aura of death. It was just like the yellow springs outside. Not good. He's about to be possessed. Once he succeeds, his strength might undergo an astonishing transformation. Ling Han and the other 5 cried out in surprise. Possession was a very rare occurrence. Generally, which expert would be willing to give up their own physical body to occupy another person's body? Taking over someone else's body meant giving up one's original cultivation. Moreover, the rules of heaven and earth used the divine soul as the benchmark to determine a person's lifespan. Even if an expert who was about to die of old age took over the body of a young martial artist, it was impossible to recalculate his lifespan with the young body. But if he really allowed this mysterious being to successfully possess him, then it was extremely likely that he was at the eternal river tier, and his battle prowess would definitely be terrifyingly elevated. Kill. Wu Wentong made a prompt decision. Given Wu Zhe's strength, there was no way he could resist the mysterious being's possession. In that case, it was also impossible for them to expel the other party's divine sense. Thus, the only thing they could do was to kill Wu Zhe before the possession was complete. Kill. Shenzhu said with a nod. The disciples of the Majestic Heaven sect couldn't kill each other, but that depended on the situation. The current Wu Zhe was no longer Wu Zhe. Instead, he would become a terrifying demon. Behead in swaddling clothes. The 6 of them attacked Wu Zhe at the same time. Chapter 1198. Although Wu Zhe was also a king tier of the younger generation, he had to admit that he was the weakest among the 7. This was also one of the reasons why he had been targeted by the mysterious being. The weaker one was, the easier it would be to possess them, and the higher their chances of success would be. Possession was a heaven-defying act. Even such a powerful being had to be careful, and they could only choose a weakling like Wu Zhe to maximize their chances of success. Right now, Wu Zhe was being attacked by the combined attacks of 6 king tiers. He would probably be insta-killed in a single strike. Wang. Wu Zhe raised his left hand and pressed down lightly. An invisible power appeared and froze the attacks of the 6 king tiers in place. He broke into a smile, and said, "Don't be impatient. I'll kill all of you after I've completely adapted to this body." This smile was incredibly sinister and sinister. Ling Han and the others were astonished. How was this possible? There were restrictions here that targeted power at the Sun-Moon tier and above. However, Wu Zhe had managed to freeze their attacks with a single strike. This power had definitely surpassed the Mountain River tier. Why weren't there any backlash from the restrictions? This isn't power, but regulations, Wu Zhe said with a smile. However, there was a black aura swirling around his face at this moment. He was naturally no longer the person he had been before. Instead, he was the mysterious being that had been possessed. He kindly explained, "I stood at the peak of the Eternal River tier in the past, and I was only a step away from advancing into the Genesis tier. My grasp of regulations isn't something you weaklings can imagine." He twisted his body lightly. Pa. His bones crackled, and his body underwent a massive transformation. It was as if he were modifying his body to adapt to his habits. Break. Ling Han and the others all unleashed their might and broke free. Although Wu Zhe had once stood at a frightening height, he was only left with a wisp of his soul, after all. He was relying on the body of a Mountain River tier to display his might. It would be unreasonable if he still possessed the battle prowess of an Eternal River tier elite. Ling Han and the others were king tiers of the younger generation. Even if there were other young king tiers in the vast immortal realm, they would probably only be able to stand shoulder to shoulder with them. They had all cultivated to the peak stage of the pinnacle level, and it would be extraordinarily difficult to surpass them. However, Shinju and the others didn't dare to use their 10 stars of power. Otherwise, they would have to endure the backlash of the restriction. If that happened, they wouldn't be increasing their battle prowess. Instead, they would be seeking death. All 6 of them unleashed their most powerful attacks, bombarding Wuxia in a frenzy. Wuxia remained calm and unruffled, using only a single hand to deal with the attacks. In fact, the laws he used were also extremely simple. It was merely a few divine inscriptions, yet they had an unexpected effect, easily blocking the attacks of the 6 kings. On the other hand, he was still modifying his body. Bone spurs protruded from his back, and a single horn grew from his forehead, glowing with a faint silver luster. If Wuxia still had his own consciousness, he might feel gratified. This was because even though he was one of the 7 kings before, he was undoubtedly the weakest link. But now, he was able to take on the combined attacks of 6 kings by himself, and it was extremely easy. This was an absolutely unimaginable achievement. If word of it got out, it would make him the #1 genius in the world. Unfortunately, he was no longer Wuxia. Comfortable, it's really comfortable. Wuxia stretched his neck. His current body was at least twice as tall, and his physique was more muscular. His skin was extremely tanned, and there were patches of it. Upon closer inspection, one would discover that they were actually divine inscriptions. They seemed to be natural, and there were no signs that they were man-made. He stretched lazily, and a smile appeared on his face. He stared at Ling Han and the others, and said, "Stinky bugs, let me think about how I should kill you. Should I steam you, or braise you? Fuck you." Ling Han retreated into the distance. He unsheathed his annihilating dragon star arrow and shot it at Wuxia. Pa! Wuxia stretched out his right hand and clamped 2 fingers together, trapping the origin power arrow between his fingers. This was too frightening. The annihilating dragon star arrow was extremely fast, yet it had been caught between 2 fingers. This arrow is a little interesting. If it weren't for the fact that my grasp of the regulations of heaven and earth is far superior to yours, I might have really been pierced. He said with a grin. It worked. Shinju exclaimed excitedly. His fingers are injured. True enough, there was fresh blood flowing between Wuxia's fingers. Damn it. Wuxia's expression changed, and he said, "This body is still too weak." Although his grasp of regulations is far superior to ours, his physical body hasn't become stronger because of this. His power hasn't changed either, Shi Angua immediately said. It's not like we don't have a chance to defeat him, He Tao said. The 6 of them nodded in unison. They were all king tiers of the current generation, and their willpower was as tough as steel. Although the current situation was dire, they didn't panic. Instead, they calmly analyzed the situation. Wuxia chuckled coldly, and said, "So what? Under the suppression of my regulations of heaven and earth, what can you do?" He stretched out his hand. Boom! Numerous divine inscriptions lit up on his body, transforming into divine chains that shot toward the 6 king tiers. Ling Han and the others hurriedly dodged. Wuxia's power wasn't much weaker than theirs, and added with the fact that he had far surpassed the regulations of heaven and earth, his battle prowess was already far beyond what they could contend against. Ha ha ha! Wuxia laughed loudly. It seemed like he still had a shred of his own willpower left. Otherwise, why would he be so smug even if he could suppress a few mountain river tier ants with a flip of his hand? Ling Han unleashed his annihilating dragon star arrow, firing origin power arrows one after another as he tried to maintain his distance from his opponents. This was an attack that could threaten Wuxia. Even Wuxia didn't dare to be careless. His battle prowess was indeed powerful, but his cultivation level was only at the mountain river tier, after all. This was a massive weakness, and he had to deal with Ling Han's attack first. Otherwise, his physical body would be in great trouble if he was struck by an arrow. In this way, he bought space for everyone to move, and also gave the young king tears time to unleash their powerful attacks. Green bamboo kill. Shenju, exclaimed. The space between her brows split open, and a small green bamboo appeared. However, the moment it appeared, it rapidly grew in size, and transformed into a towering bamboo. However, it didn't have a specific shape, so it wasn't affected by this limited space. The green bamboo trembled, and countless green leaves fell from it, transforming into numerous bamboo swords that swept toward Wuxia. Purple flames. Shi Angguo roared, and flames danced around his body. He clapped his hands, and a fire lion appeared. Its body was covered in purple divine flames, and it charged toward Wuxia. Torrential black water. He Tao roared. One of his eyes was tightly shut, and the other was wide open. A black river of spirits surged out. The 6 king tears all unleashed their ultimate techniques. None of them dared to hold back at this moment. Otherwise, it was possible that they would all die here. Boom! Divine light soared into the sky, sweeping toward Wuxia. Chapter 1200. What? Wuxia turned pale with fright. Lan Yun, you're still alive. He looked at the corpse on the ground. The blue-skinned corpse chuckled as it crawled to its feet. Its 10-meter-tall body cast a long shadow on the ground. Ling Han and the others were all astonished. Although they had suspected that this mysterious being wasn't the true master of this place, they were still astonished to see the blue-skinned elite stand up again. Wuxia stared at the blue-skinned elite. After a while, he laughed loudly, and said, "So you're really dead. You're just a remnant consciousness that has entered your original body." Indeed. The blue-skinned elite nodded. However, it's more than enough to kill you. Wuxia's expression changed, and he exclaimed, "Did you set this up on purpose? Did you wait for my divine soul to leave the earth's core and possess this body so that you could kill me?" The blue-skinned elite laughed loudly, and said, "What else could I do? You were hiding in the earth's core, but I was on the brink of death back then. I couldn't possibly chase you all the way to the earth's core to kill you. How could I not lure you out?" Why you're really good at holding back," Wuxia said. "It's already been tens of millions of years, and your corpse is about to turn to dust. Why are you still so stubborn? Why must you kill me? Humph. Even if I die 1,000 times, I won't let you off, you freak of the netherworld." The blue-skinned elite roared. What? This mysterious being is from the netherworld? No wonder the blue-skinned elite was filled with hatred and killing intent toward the netherworld when he carved those words into the ground. Combined with the traces of battle outside, it could be deduced that these 2 elites must have engaged in a great battle. In the end, the blue-skinned elite had probably won, but he had suffered a fatal injury and was about to die. Meanwhile, the mysterious being's body had been destroyed, and only his divine soul was left. However, due to the special nature of the netherworld, he had been hiding in the earth's core, struggling at death's door. After tens of millions of years, the mysterious being thought that the blue-skinned elite had died, so he seized the opportunity to possess his body and begin his second life. That's right, this place was densely covered with restrictions. They were probably used to suppress the mysterious existence, so that he could only appear in the palace. Otherwise, the mysterious existence would have been able to escape long ago since this secret realm had been opened many times. He wouldn't have had to wait until the palace opened this time. He had thought that the blue-skinned elite had set up these traps to imprison him for all eternity. However, he hadn't expected that this was actually a trap within a trap. The blue-skinned elite had only done this to make him feel safe. After emerging from the earth's core and possessing the blue-skinned elite, his divine sense naturally wouldn't be able to wander around. And with his current physical body, it was extremely fragile. Wuxia's entire body was trembling. Even when his physical body had been smashed to pieces, he hadn't felt such anxiety and fear. That was because he had just taken over a body, and it was impossible for his divine soul to escape. Lan Yun, you really have a good plan, he said through gritted teeth. How can I not scheme against a coward like you? The blue-skinned elite chuckled. Don't even think about buying time. Although I've only left behind a wisp of my will, it won't be a problem for it to last for 3 to 5 days. Wu Zhi's expression changed again. He was indeed trying to stall for time. Unlike him, the blue-skinned elite had truly died. Only a wisp of his will remained. However, this was a rootless flame that would soon be extinguished. However, 3 to 5 days was far too long. The blue-skinned elite hated netherworld beings to the core, so how could he possibly give Wu Zhi 3 to 5 days? He wouldn't be able to boast for that long even if he cracked his lips. Die, sunken old demon, the blue-skinned elite roared. Boom! A devastating power swept over, causing even the heavens to tremble. This was a power that surpassed the heavenly body tier. Why didn't the restrictions attack him? What a joke! He was the master of this place, so how could the restrictions attack him? Boom! The blue-skinned elite's palm landed, and Wu Zhi instantly transformed into a rain of blood. His physical body was far too fragile, so how could it possibly rival the power of an eternal river tier elite? However, the blue-skinned elite didn't relax. Instead, he continued to search for Wu Zhi with his divine sense. Netherworld elites weren't so easy to kill. Previously, he had destroyed the blue-skinned elite's body, yet hadn't his divine sense still managed to escape? Humph! Trying to escape. The blue-skinned elite attacked again. This time, he slammed his palm toward the door. Pang! The door was forcefully shattered, and a shadow that was extremely difficult to capture with the naked eye hurtled out. It was that netherworld elite. Ling Han and the others all sucked in a breath of cold air. An eternal river tier elite had attacked. Moreover, he had such a huge advantage in cultivation level. Yet, he still hadn't been able to kill the netherworld elite with a single strike. This was unimaginably powerful. Lan Yun, you actually forced me to use this technique. Even if you die, I'll turn your bones into dust. The shadow flew toward the yellow spring in the sky. This was the corpse of a netherworld elite. If he fused with it with his divine sense, he would obtain immense power. However, his old body was already dead. Thus, the yellow spring was extremely harmful to him. It was like a mouthful of poison. However, he had no choice but to fight with everything he had. Otherwise, he would die. As long as he didn't die, there was a chance that he could be healed, no matter how severe his injuries were. The blue-skinned elite humphed, and said, I've planned this for millions of years, so how could I possibly fail at the last moment? His figure flashed, and he actually dashed out at an incredible speed. His fist smashed into the yellow spring. Star-chasing step! Ling Han exclaimed in his mind. Although he hadn't started cultivating this movement technique yet, he could tell with a single glance. Hua! The blue-skinned elite's body trembled, and he transformed into a giant that was 3,000 meters tall. He blocked the yellow spring, and he stood proudly between heaven and earth. You! The netherworld elite wanted to vomit blood. He couldn't borrow the power of the yellow spring anymore. You used your body to withstand the power of the dark yellow spring, he said in a stern voice. You'll soon turn into bones. Don't you want to die? He subconsciously thought that the blue-skinned elite was a living person. However, he quickly realized that although the blue-skinned elite was alive and kicking in front of him, his body had long since lost its vitality. There was only a remnant consciousness supporting him, and it couldn't last for long. Since that was the case, what did it matter whether his body turned into bones or not? He had already been dead for tens of millions of years. Ha ha ha, I've waited for this day for far too long. The blue-skinned elite stretched out his hand and pressed down on the shadow. Divine patterns intertwined, and the light of regulations shone brilliantly. This was the true power of the eternal river tier. No! The netherworld elite screamed in despair. This divine sense instantly spread throughout the entire mystery realm. This was the ultimate song of an eternal river tier elite. There was a strong sense of unwillingness in the sky, as well as an eerie aura that caused one to shiver. This was the martial art intent that was unique to Netherworld cultivators. It's finally over. The blue-skinned elite said with a smile of relief. Boom! His massive body collapsed, and he rapidly shrank. Then, he was swept away by the yellow spring, becoming one of the tens of thousands of dead souls. An elite of a generation had finally disappeared from this world. Ling Han and the others were all rendered speechless. They hadn't played any role in this battle, and they had only been bait. A mighty king tier of the younger generation had actually been reduced to bait. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.